This is Mark Guerrero. Welcome to episode 16 of East L.A. Music Stories. My guest today is Mr. Max Uballez, who is founder and leader and rhythm guitarist and chief songwriter of the Romancers, one of the pioneering East Side sound bands, very early, first band to be managed by Billy Cardenas, of many who were to come later, and made a lot of really good 45s and a couple of albums, and has quite a story to tell. And so first of all, I'd like to welcome you, Max. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing okay, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So tell me, how'd you get started in music?
Well, when I first the early part of it is I never really intended to get into music. I just used to like to sing a lot. When I was real young, I used to live in the projects, and I used to sit under this girl's window. Her name was Rose, and she would play this Johnny Ace record, "Forever My Darling, I Live with Pleasure, My Love," and she would play it every day. So when I would go out walking around the neighborhood, I would sit at her window for a while and listen to her play the record. It was the only record she owned. And I would sit there for a little while, listen to the song, and I would sing along with her. And she was, I guess, really in love. It's the only record she had, and she was in love with Johnny Ace. And one day I went by her house, and there was no music. And I wondered where the music went, and she was crying, and Johnny Ace had died. And it was like our little joint thing, our love for Johnny Ace. So I left her window that day, and I went around my walking, and I found myself singing his song over and over again, because I was thinking to myself, gee, I'm going to keep his memory alive. I'm going to keep singing "Forever My Darling." I don't know nothing about love or whatever, but somehow it seemed to make him immortal, And so it became the habit of I was always picking up little songs as I walked past people's windows, So I used to sing that song. I used to sing, there was that "Cheek to Cheek" by the Stair, And so I was always singing to myself, and I used to walk through the sewers of the LA River and be standing sometimes in the tunnels. There was a big echo, and I would be singing and "Make You Sound Good." And there was a group of guys that sometimes we go down there and we do doo-wop together. And actually, a lot of people don't know, but during that time was the first time I met Frankie Garcia. And we used to stand in the tunnels and sing doo-wop together.
Frankie later became Cannibal.
Yeah, became Cannibal, yeah. And of course, I wouldn't, eventually we moved away from the projects, and I just continued singing. I used to find there was a little stairway near the Lincoln Heights Library, and I could sit down there and sing to myself, and it would echo off the walls. So I enjoyed doing it. And eventually it got to the point that my grandfather gave me a guitar, and I would sit in my room and bang on it and sing, and I'd go down there and sing. And I wasn't thinking anything about it. And then somebody walked past the staircase one day and said, "Hey, you want to join a band?" And I said, "Well, I guess I could," So I started singing it. Then step forward, there was this some of the little parties and stuff that we used to do. There was this short, stocky guy with dark glasses and a flat top, and he looked like he just stepped out of a gangster movie. And he walked up to me and he says, "I'm gonna make you the next Richie Valens." And I didn't want to be the next anything, And it seemed like wherever I was playing, there was this guy, Billy Cardenas, saying, "I'm going to make you the next Richie Valens." Well, fast forward, my neighbor, Eliseo Gonzalez, he was part of a mariachi band, Los Camperos, and
Wow.
I was walking past his house one day, and I heard all this music. I didn't know he was in that group, and I heard the best mariachi music on the radio I ever heard, and it turns out to be a live band. And I used to go down there on my guitar and sit on the steps and try to play along with them in some way. I was basically even learning to tune my guitar. That was before I met Billy. And then I learned that Eliseo moved away, and I learned that he had made a record. And I never thought about singing, making a record, or how it works out, how somebody goes and makes a record and stuff like that. But I decided right then, I got this real big romantic dream that I should make a record for my mother for Mother's Day. And so there came to mind right away, Billy Cardenas, he wants to make me a Richie Valens. So I contacted Billy, and we talked about it. And he said, "Well, you probably have to put together a band." I said, "Well, I got to know a bunch of guys around. We'll start putting together a band, and we'll see what we can do." about making a record. So Billy and I became partners. We were going to be. He said, "I'll be your partner. I'll be your manager, but I'll be your partner." So we shook hands and we did that, and it wasn't such an easy thing to put a band together. Was putting the band together was easier than finding work for the band. So we needed to develop a way to get gigs, because there were a lot of bands in town. There were a lot of groups that were playing around town already, but their manager usually promoted their dances, and we couldn't get any gigs. So we decided that we needed to find a way to promote our own dances. And we used to rehearse at the Lincoln Heights the Lincoln Heights playground. They had a little shack out there in the middle of off to the corner of the playground where they used as a storage area, and they let us sit out there and rehearse.
Were you living in the Lincoln Heights area?
Yeah, I was living in Lincoln Heights at that time. When I was walking the neighborhood down in the river, down in the L.A. River, I was living in Dogtown at that time. But we had moved to Lincoln Heights. We moved up a step.
Ooh. So Lincoln Heights was a district in East Los Angeles in the unincorporated area. City Terrace was another, Boyle Heights. So there are all these little districts within that East LA area.
Yeah, the local gang was Clover. So we would rehearse right there in the little storage area, and there were girls used to hang around. There were windows. There would be girls sitting on the railings listening to us. So after a while of trying to find a way to promote dances, we found out we couldn't promote dances because we weren't an organization. They would rent the dance halls to weddings or quinceañeras or stuff like that. And there was this hall called, it was some kind of a long Italian name, Giorgio, whatever. We ended up calling it the Gigi Hall, and they wouldn't rent it to us. So I decided that if we took these girls and turned them into a club and call them the Romancerettes, we could go down and rent the hall for them, and they could sponsor our dance. So it turned out that was a really, really great promotional idea, because they were all good-looking high school girls, and we printed flyers for our dance at the Gigi Hall, and Billy and I drove them around to various high schools, and they were handing out flyers, and our dances became a success at the Gigi Hall.
Now, where was the Gigi Hall?
The Gigi Hall was on North Broadway in Lincoln Heights.
Okay. Now look, I found a flyer of a Gigi Hall gig, but you were not playing at it. This one, I don't know if you can see it, but it's got the Little Heartbreakers, the Premiers, the Rhythm Playboys, Gigi Hall. And March 7th, 1964.
If you want, I'll send you another one that I think I have one of our first performances.
Cool.
But anyway, the Romancerettes were our part of our little business that Billy and I were running, and we were promoting dances with a lot of bands. Yeah,
it does say the Romancerettes up there and Supremes.
Part of what we did with Romancerettes is we were, I don't know how it all worked out, but we put a scholarship for the kids graduating out of Lincoln High School. Through our dances, we would donate money to a scholarship through the Romancerettes.
So it says here, from 9 to 1, boys wear ties. Woo!
Well, that's a really another thing that's really kind of important that I think that's never been mentioned about the East Side Sound is that I remember I was talking to Steve Chavez once quite a few years back, and he was telling me he lived in South Central, but he heard about our dances, and he said, Max, I would start early in the day and take 3 or 4 buses to get to Lincoln Heights to one of your dances.
Wow.
And it seemed that was a thing that was happening all over the place. We had people coming from all over Southern California to come to our dances at the Gigi Hall. And back in the day, because like I say, Lincoln Heights was in Clover, and there was always the gang lines where you couldn't cross neighborhoods. You couldn't go across a neighborhood one to the other. Someone would stop you and say where you're from. You could jump, somebody beats the crap out of you. But what happened is during the times that we were throwing dances, there seemed to be a truce that was developed, where if you were on your way to a dance wearing a tie, you were cool. You could go over there and there was no problem.
Wow.
Really, the interesting thing is that I've been told that during the timing of it is that within a few years later, we had the walkouts in Lincoln Heights at Lincoln High School. And a lot of people attribute it to the fact that that people going to the dances in the various neighborhoods began to talk with each other at all different high schools, and that's where they developed the organization to do the walkout that occurred
in '68. Those happened in '68.
Yeah, and the thing is that it was safer to go to the neighborhood carrying a guitar than a gun.
There you go. But speaking of it also says here, boys wear ties, girls dress nice.
Right.
That carried on over to the St. Alphonsus Auditorium and the Montebello Ballroom. During that East Side Sound period, people got kind of dressed up. They didn't just go in Levi's and tank tops,
Yeah. That was a little line that Billy thought up, and he says, "Hey, boys wear ties." I didn't even have a damn tie, I didn't own a tie.
What about most bands at that time had, some of them had suits with ties or dress coats with ties. Also, a lot of bands dressed with ties.
Yeah, initially we didn't until we had some money, and once we were successful,
once you could afford it.
Once we could afford it, in the beginning we just wore the same color shirt, And once we had a couple of successful dances at the Gigi Hall, we bought suits for the band, and also we bought sweaters for the Romancerettes. They had like 3 different sweaters that they wore that said Romancerettes on it. The first album that they put out on the East Side Sound, the picture was taken at the Shrine Auditorium. I don't know if you have that album.
Yes.
Right on the cover, you see a bunch of girls sitting in a.
You're talking about this album?
Let's see. Lift it up. Those girls are the Romancerettes. And if you look right in the middle on the bottom, there's a girl with a little curly Q in her hair. That's my wife, Linda. And all the girls in the front row, they are Romancerettes. All of them are. Both rows.
And that was the Linda that they named Linda Records after?
Yes. When Eddie Davis asked me if I would please record for him, because I really, I guess we can get to that later. I really wasn't at that time. I just wanted to make one record for my mother.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to do. And once I did that one recording, I figured that I was kind of out of it, and that would be enough for me. I will describe later on how I continued to do it, or what forced me to get in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But Billy and I, after we started getting the dances going, he was driving a truck for Crown Records, and once a week he would make deliveries to the Hollywood, and we would go to Wallace Music City and all the different music stores. On those days, I would go and assist him, and I would be his swamper, I guess, and help him unload stuff. And then we would go from door to door. I would change my clothes when we go do an audition. And actually, we met Sonny Bono there. Sonny Bono was driving the truck, delivering meat, and doing the same thing.
I was going to mention that Crown Records was kind of a low budget label.
Yeah, they redid music and sold it like a thrifty drugstore and stuff like that. 99 cent album, you could buy a 12-inch album LP, And Billy and I, that was the beginning of us trying to get into the business, and we ran into all kinds of people. We ran into Phil Spector, Bob Keane. We met Bumps Blackwell, Lester Seal, Jim Lee, Little Richard. All these guys were out there trying to get in the door,
Specialty Records. Little Richard and Sonny Bono later worked for Specialty. That's where Chan Romero met him.
Yeah, that was Bumps Blackwell's label.
Him
Bumps
too.
Was managing Little Richard, and at the time Little Richard lived in a part of West L.A., and we would go out to his house periodically and have dinner there, and he would entertain us and stuff like that.
Little Richard, yeah,
that's
incredible.
We met all these people, and we would just go around. They were all talking to business and stuff like that, and it was pretty exciting for us. And those would become connections that Billy would use later on to bring acts to East L.A. to play. Like we met the Righteous Brothers when they were recording out there before they were the Righteous Brothers, and Chris Montez, and we had little short relationships with them. We would just hang out in the studios down there or in the offices, because that's what everybody did. Everybody was just knocking on doors,
When you hear stories like this, it's so much. It's fate, the fate, how you met Billy, what he was doing. All these things had to fall into place, which in many ways, all that gave birth to the East Side Sound that we all know and love.
Yeah.
The 60s.
Yeah. Initially, when we kept trying to, Billy's big dream was to make me Richie Valens, kept trying to get in to see Bob Keane. And finally, it occurred that we did a gig out in Pacoima, and I was doing songs, and I would always do Richie Valens songs, and I was doing Donna or something, and somebody started shooting at me. And it was like Quinceañera or something like that. We were playing in a garage, we were a little small band, and somebody started shooting. And I guess I was told later it was a relative of Richie Valens was angry because I sounded too much like Richie, and he was all heartbroken. But we basically got chased out of Pacoima. So Billy took that story and relived it to Bob Keane. And Bob saying, well, I'll bring the kid in. He wasn't interested at the beginning. So we went down there and we auditioned for Bob Keane, and we recorded a song called "You Better," and we waited. And Billy was kind of impatient, and Bob didn't respond quick enough. So he said, let's go back to knocking on doors. So we went back to knocking on doors, and I finally walked through an office. There was a radio station on the corner across from Bob Keane's office on Selma and Vine. And upstairs there was a bunch of producers, and there was a radio station there. And so we started going down the hallway. I always carried my guitar with me, and I stepped into an office that was belonged to Joe Van Winkle. Joe Van Winkle is a guy who produced Adobe Gray. I'm in with the In Crowd.
Yeah.
At that time, he had a thing called Please Mr. Custer.
Yeah.
And so I sat down in a chair and sang for him. And within about a week, we were in the studio recording a song called "You'd Better." And then I didn't think about it again. And at the time, I was also working as an upholsterer, and we were doing gigs on weekends, and I was working as an upholsterer. And one thing about being an upholsterer is that when in those days, before they had staple guns, we had like a big barrel of tacks, and it said sanitized tacks. And we would fill our mouth with tacks.
Oh my God.
And we had this hammer that magnetized on one side, and we would hold the fabric in place and then put the tack on our hammer and nail it in as we went along. And it was like spitting out sunflower seeds, But I was standing there with a mouthful of tacks one day, and they were listening to KFWB, and all of a sudden this guy comes on and says, and this one's headed for the charts. Maximilian says, "You'd better." And my record comes on, and I almost like choked. And anyway, but I wondered, well, wait a minute, who in the heck is Maximilian, And it turned out what happened was our promotion man, a guy named Russ Regan, who became
big time
later on, went to the meeting with KFWB to get our record played, and they liked the record, but on my name it said Max Uballez. And the program director says, I will not play this record with the name Max Uballez on it. So Russ was smart. He immediately went out to the secretary, got a label, and typed out the name Maximilian and put it on the record and handed it back to him. And
well, once again, it was because Uballez was too Latino sounding.
Yeah, too Latino.
Richie Valens and Chris Montez and everybody else.
Definitely, when Russ actually said to me, he says, Max, I'm sorry, but the program director looked at me and says, we're not playing no mariachi music on this station.
That's what we all went through, yeah, terrible.
So at that time, that's when I first realized what Billy was talking about my connection with Richie Valens. Because I know Richie Valens had his name changed to Richie Valens from Ricardo Valenzuela, because of the ethnic thing. But I never really felt an ethnic tie until that moment. I said, oh, now I get it. That was my big thing.
So to clarify it, it's like you recorded "You'd Better" with Bob Keane, but he sat on his ass, and Billy, being impatient, moved on without telling him even probably. And then you recorded it again, right? A new version with Magic Circle Records, was that it?
Yeah. The thing with Bomb was just a demonstration, a demo.
It was a demo.
Yeah, but anyway.
But you re-recorded it, right, for the other group?
Yeah, I recorded. Yeah, with the Romancers band was on the recording, on both recordings, and then what happened was Bob Keane heard the record on the radio, and some kind of big political thing or legal thing happened, and I let Billy handle everything, so I really didn't know what was going on, and he never really mentioned it to me until he was forced to, because he just called me one day and said, hey, we're going to record for Bob Keane now. And I said, okay, that's fine. Let's go make a record. So Bob Keane gave me a bunch of, go ahead.
But didn't he, but he stopped the other record from being promoted. So it killed your possible hit right there.
Yeah. I didn't know he had done that. See, I really didn't know what he had done with these people. But like I've heard several little stories, but basically he gave him a song and a dance, said he's a poor minority Mexican kid. And I was a minor. So he said his parents didn't know what they were signing, really don't have any money, you really can't sue him. And they had invested this money, so they weren't too happy about it. And when Bob Keane showed up saying, well, I recorded him first, I have the rights to it, I have a verbal agreement or something like that. I don't know what went into but I didn't know that was going on. All I knew was Bob Keane. I was going to record with Bob Keane. He started giving me a bunch of old Richie Valens things that Richie had recorded and asked me to redo them or do something. And one of the songs was a thing called Rock Little Darlin'. It was a demo that Richie had done. I took it, and another really auspicious thing occurred then. He sent me out to meet Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa had a small studio. Paul Buff, actually, it was Paul Buff and Frank Zappa had a studio in Cucamonga. And I guess the Cucamonga, there really is a place called Cucamonga.
Yes. W.C. Fields would always mention it.
Yeah, I know. I just thought it was really weirdest thing. So anyway, so I went to Cucamonga and recorded Rock Little Darlin' and another thing called Shirley for Donna Records.
Which was a Bob Keane label.
On the Bob Keane label. And it was released, and he released it as Max Uballez. He dropped a Z on my name and put an S. And it went right on rotation, and they started playing it. And that's when the crap hit the fan. And Magic Circle Records came back and said, wait a minute, we didn't mind turning around with the story Billy gave them, but this is not going to work. And there was a clause in the recording contract that says I couldn't record as a vocalist for 5 years after. So therefore, Bob Keane had to pull Rock Little Darlin' off the air, and I was blocked from recording ever again.
That's your second record blocked off the air in a row.
2 records in a row. Anyway, I just, like I said, Mark, I really didn't think much of doing this thing. I just thought I'd make a record for my mother. I now had 2 records for my mother. I didn't mind too much. But what I did mind was them closing the door and saying, you cannot do something. Don't, I'm kind of a stubborn guy. And you tell me you cannot do something, I'm going to come back and find a way to do it. So we contacted Bob Keane, and I told Bob, listen, I still have a band. I can't sing, but I can record an instrumental. And then surprisingly, he said, okay, well, we'll schedule you on Wednesday. Come on in and record what you got. I didn't have nothing, but so I sat there and I wrote 2 songs. I wrote the Sausage Shuffle along with a thing called All Aboard. And we rehearsed the next day, and the following day was like 3 days. The third day we were doing in Bob's studio to record. So we recorded the Sausage Shuffle and we recorded All Aboard, and it took us 15-20 minutes. And the band was really, 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 really good. And the reason they were so good is because when we were doing gigs, we used to have to play all night. So all night I was constantly giving them, rewriting and redoing stuff for them to play. And we had like a little signal where I would tell them, and we were doing a ballad like in C, I would tell them ice cream changes, and I would be going to C, A minor, F, and G. And the same thing, no matter what key we were in, it was a 4-chord change, and I would sing a ballad. I'd find a ballad that would fit key A, key E, and they knew what to do immediately. And if I was doing a rock tune, we would just do what I call the Chuck Berry changes, which was the three chord change, and we would just go into it. All I needed to do was tell them what key it was or hum a few bars to them, and they would pick it up. So when we recorded those 2 songs for Bob, I walked into the control room, and he looked at me and he says, this is supposed to take 4 hours. And I felt like, gee, I let the guy down, I should have took him. And he says, we got more than 3.5 hours left here. So what else you got, kid? And I stopped for a moment and stuff. It's one of those moments where you're like, you stop in midair. You say, well, the Max inside said, well, Max, you ain't got diddly. You ain't got nothing. But then I went back into the rest. I'll be right back. And I went into the room, and when I walked into the room, I didn't know what I was going to do, but everybody's there fiddling around with their instruments. and all musicians have their little riffs that they use, you know. So I was listening to these little riffs, and I'm saying, wait, if I take this riff and I give it a few bars and throw a solo, maybe we can make it into the song. And Andy Tesso had a riff he would do. It was like a scale, and actually, you know, Andy, I'm not sure if they if he was his cousin or not, but that's what he always used to tell me. Loudy Vegas, Pat and Loudy Vegas have not been mentioned enough in this East Side Sound thing.
Right. I mentioned them,
Yeah, because they were there. Lolly used to borrow my jazz master all the time to go do sessions and stuff like that. And really good guy. And he was also, I believe, giving lessons to Andy Tesso. And so this is one of the scales he had. Da, 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 da. So we took that da 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 da, and we put a couple more bars in and threw a solo, and we made it into a song we didn't know about. And Billy came up with calling it Huggy's Bunnies.
Named after Huggy Boy, the DJ.
Yeah.
Right.
Dick Hug. So he figured, well, Huggy's Bunnies, because, and he called it Huggy's Bunnies because I guess Huggy had taken him to the Playboy Mansion, and had met the bunnies.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Billy Cardenas his greatest strength was coming up with these great little commercial catchy titles and gimmicks on records that really made a difference. You know, it wasn't so much the arrangements and musical knowledge. It was, hey, name it this, call it this, record this. He had a knack for that kind of thing.
Yeah, Billy was a really good salesman too. He, you know, that's the whole thing, and the stuff that we achieved is that we basically, when we started getting the records out there, we kind of created our own grassroots promotion program, and we would drive around to all these record stores all over Southern California, taking our records, performing. I'd bring my guitar with me, I go sing, and then later on we would bring the Heartbreakers with us, and then we would do appearances there and sign records and do all kinds of stuff. But it was really our own little grassroots promotional thing, and the record companies weren't doing that. They weren't focusing on the local stores. They really didn't care about it. They were selling records to Wallach's Music City, so who cares, you know? But anyway, we found out that there were certain record stores that reported what records they sold to the local radio stations, therefore justifying more airplay. So we made little deals here and there.
You mentioned the Heartbreakers. That was a duo that came from Texas, great harmony, brothers. And then they had little brothers that became the Little Heartbreakers, and you guys would back up both groups. So it was the Romancers with the Heartbreakers and the Little Heartbreakers. And the name Heartbreakers was kind of made to match Romancers in a way, right?
Yeah, it's Romancers, Heartbreakers. Yeah, it was made to match. Again, as Billy gave all the groups their names. You know,
Amazing.
He gave them their names, and the Heartbreakers bring us back to Frank Zappa and Paul Buff.
Yes.
We wanted the Heartbreakers had a song that they had learned when we first met them. Most of what they sang was in Spanish, and so here comes the point where we were started to throw these dances, and we needed to have more groups to do the dances because the Romancers band was playing all night. You know, we were taking 15-minute breaks and playing all night. So a lot of musicians began to approach us and say they wanted to do stuff. So Richard Provincio, who was my main guitar player with the Romancers at the time, he didn't play on the Sloss and Shuffle, but he was my main guitar player. He and I would spend Saturday mornings driving around to places Billy would take us to jam with other bands. There was a lot of groups around, but they didn't have such a large repertoire. We had already developed a large repertoire, so we would sit there. We wouldn't try to teach them. We would just play with them, and they picked it up. It wasn't that difficult. It's not rocket science, you know. So we would do that, and during the course of that, we ran into the Heartbreakers, and we went out to Frank Zappa's to record the Heartbreakers on this song that they were already doing called Cradle Rock, which I guess was a kind of a minimal hit in Texas or something.
Mm-hmm.
So we recorded Cradle Rock, and we needed another side, and Frank Zappa had a song called Every Time I See You.
Mm-hmm.
So we went ahead and recorded Every Time I See You and kind of messed with it in the studio. In fact, Frank Zappa took the guitar solo in Every Time I See You by the Heartbreakers. He was a romancer for one day.
Yeah. Frank Zappa does have not only that connection with the East LA scene, but he also worked with Ronnie and the Pomona Casuals.
Yeah,
That's recording.
I didn't know. But
And
anyway,
yeah,
and during that time, I kind of got interested in producing, because I saw them what they were doing, and they had a multi-track recorder that Paul Buff had built himself. I think it had 5 tracks on it. I don't know what size tape they were using, but it was kind of interesting that he was already into multi-tracking, which
wow.
was that I hadn't heard of yet, you know. So I became interested in that. When Bob Keane asked us what else we got, we ended up putting together enough songs in the studio to record the Do the Slauson album.
And you did the whole album in what, 4 hours?
Yeah, we recorded. It was not even 4 hours. We used up our 4 hours. We were 3.5 hours or whatever, because it was just a matter of doing. It was like doing a gig for my band. They were really really good. And the band that I used for that session was Andy Tesel on guitar, Chris Pasquale on bass, Manuel Mosqueda, who Billy named Goofy on drums. Let's see, who was that? Armando Mora on saxophone,
Yes.
and a lot of the saxophone parts were doubled and harmonized because he was a really really good sax player.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
Here's the album,
oh
Do the Slauson. And you guys wrote most of the songs in the studio in that 4 hours as well. You did a few covers, but like you did Patricia, Mint Julep, but and Sticky were covers. But Slow Shift, Slauson Sax, Double Slauson, you name it. Just Tough Talk, that was a cool song. That was a great album. I love this album to this day. It's astounding how professional and mature you guys sounded. I mean, because you guys, how old would you say you were? Like 16, 17?
I was right around somewhere between 17 and 18 years old myself.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, you guys sounded really, I mean, Armando Mora played great sax solos throughout. Andy Tesso laid the groundwork for the East Side Sound guitar sound. I mean, everybody was kind of imitating him. Rudy Valona came along from the Blendells. I kind of copied that thing. So, Lawrence Perez was the Premiers was influenced by it. There was a certain like a Telecaster sound. It was really cool in a way of playing. And like you say, maybe Andy got some of it from Lolly Vegas, but that's where it came from.
A lot of it was from Lolly. Lolly showed us a lot of stuff. He was really really nice guy, and of course, come and get your love.
Yeah. Redbone. But before he was Vegas, he was Vasquez. So once again, name change. You want to play? He was told if you want to play on the Sunset Strip, change your name.
Yeah, they weren't playing any of the shows in East L.A. They were already aware of going out and knocking on doors and doing session work in Hollywood. That's what they were doing. And like I said, I might have followed them, but I really wasn't thinking of a career in music. And we had an LP, and I'm told it was the first LP by a Chicano band from East L.A. ever recorded, which is like another lucky little thing we stopped into.
Right. Now I did want to mention because there were East LA bands before the Romancers, like Johnny and the Crowns and the Armenta Brothers and the did you know the what are they called here? The Sportsmen?
Yeah.
Yeah. I talked to the guy from them. I may interview him soon. I think his name's Orlando Zamora. And
Don't know the name.
Yeah, but there was some bands, but like I say, you guys were sort of the prototype of the mid-60s East LA band style that the Blendells kind of took from the Premiers, my band, Mark and the Escorts, the Atlantic. So many groups were spawned from that, and they were all managed by Billy Cardenas.
I think we were the first kind of garage band, because most of the bands at that time, they were all using charts. They had music stands and everything. And in fact, the first time I saw Johnny and the Crowns, he was playing at the Times Boys Club in Lincoln Heights.
Mm-hmm.
And and I called up on the window and looked, and there was a live band there, and there was Johnny, and he was playing his guitar and singing. And that's when I first got the idea that I should try to sing with my guitar, because I wasn't doing that yet. That was several years before I decided to do anything with my mother. I said, well, maybe I should just be able to try singing with my guitar, because I was just singing in bathrooms and hallways and stuff like that. So very soon after that, my grandfather gave me a guitar because I saw it in his house. He said, "I'll take it, learn to play it." So I wasn't really doing anything serious, but Johnny and the Crowns was the first band that I ever saw play live, you know. So yeah, they were around. They were out there, the Skylighters. I forget what the Eddie Armand, I think, had a band. Eddie Armendariz. Anyway, but there were a lot of bands around.
When were you guys, are we talking like 62 you guys started playing? Or?
1963, 62.
Yeah.
I was just when I got out of high school, I had just graduated high school, and when I decided to do this, I got out of high school. I was working as a poster, decided to make a record for my mother, got together with Billy, and we started in 62 knocking on doors. We didn't really get anything going until I think 63, but we were all the time trying to do gigs and stuff like that. And we hit the trifecta when we had the band, we had the Romancerettes, and we had the Hall, and then You'd Better by Maximilian hit KFWB, and that pounded it for us. That broke it all wide open, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And
well, my band started in late 63, which became Mark and the Escorts. So I was late 63 when we got started. Yeah.
I don't even know what year we did Toss and Shuffle. I really wasn't keeping track. It's something that just kind of happened to me, and I wasn't working on doing anything, and it just kind of happened to me.
Probably, you think maybe early 64, maybe, possibly?
Yeah, because in 64, I started recording with Eddie Davis when we were working, we had just done things with the Premiers. In fact, when we first met the Premiers, what's his name? The Perez, Mrs. Perez contacted Billy because he had her band with John and Lawrence and George, and she wanted us to come out and hear them. So we went out to listen to them play, to kind of audition them, and they were doing a gig at a place called the Dead Man's Hall.
Oh,
Gabriel, which is another whole story. Is that the Dead Man's Hall was a hall that belonged to the neighborhood. It was a club. They called it the Funaleria, where it was a club where they would hold their funerals and their parties and their baptisms and their quinceañeras, and it was kind of owned by the neighborhood. And the Premiers were playing there, so we went out there to hear them at the Dead Man's Hall. I always remember the Dead Man's Hall.
I never heard of that.
70 songs. They were playing 4 or 5 songs, and like John was telling me, he said, you know, we had these 4 or 5 songs, and we would like play them over and over again.
Right.
Nobody knew it. Nobody knew them, but they eventually built their repertoire.
I was going to mention, before we get off the subject of that early romancers, was you mentioned the romancers that were on the Sauce and Shuffle album, but then you added some other guys like Jimmy Pasquale, lead guitar. Let's see, and Joe Whiteman. Who else did you have? You had some auxiliary members, David Bojorquez, Louis Davila, Bobby Marty on sax. Like you had a bunch of musicians where you could have 2 romancers playing different places the same night.
Yeah, we actually had 2 or 3 different bands that I could use. And we had so many musicians coming up to us during the fact of gigs, and I just tell them, hey, bring your axe, we'll have you sit in and we'll do something. And there was a time when we would have all of those sax players at the stage at the same time.
Wow.
And they were members of the Romancers band at the same time that we recorded Sauce and Shuffle. I just didn't take them with me. I picked who I wanted. Bob didn't have a big studio, and I just picked who I wanted to take to record the Sauce and Shuffle and all aboard. Louis Davila, great sax player. They were all really, really, really good. And I just chose to use these guys for this session. And the people I worked with as time went on would change back and forth. Some of them, like Chris Pasquale, had his own band called the Blue Notes. And, you might even call the first Romancer recording as half Blue Note and half Romancer because his drummer was Manuel Mosqueda, Manuel Mosqueda was a drummer, and Chris Pasquale was the bass player on Sauce and Shuffle. But, they already had their own band called the Blue Notes. And Jimmy Pasquale was Chris's brother, and he played guitar in that band. But they chose to come and work with. Eventually, it would come a time later on when Jimmy and Chris and Goofy were the Romancers band with me, that which came a long later time when Billy and I stopped working together, which is another whole big story. I could tell it right now.
Right, we'll get to that for sure.
It's not sense, but I can say it.
All right. Well, we got, man, there's so much to talk about. Let's get back to the Sloss and Shuffle, the song Sloss and Shuffle that you wrote. It's a 1-4-5, check, check, G, C, D, whatever. 1-4-5, harmony saxes, Andy Tesla's Telecaster. Great record, great song. I love it. And that, to me, that was like the template, because you could sing the Premier's Farmer John to that track.
Well,
same chords, same groove, same. I mean, literally.
That's literally where it came from. Because in all the gigs that we had, I would segue into different songs, and Farmer John was one of the songs I would segue into when we were doing the Sloss and Shuffle and Louie and stuff like that. And Billy got the idea that, hey, we should record this, and then he got together with the Premiers and recorded it without telling me. Anyway, that's another.
Were you talking about when they recorded Farmer John?
Well, I eventually got involved in it because that's where I started working with Billy and Eddie Davis at the same time. Because Billy was always a hustler. He was always trying to make it big somewhere. You know, he told me once, I asked him, "What are you really doing this for?" And he says, "Well, I just wanted to be famous." And I guess in a way, in our little neighborhood, he became famous. Absolutely. I think he could have become even more famous. But anyway, so he decided to record Farmer John using the Sloss and Shuffle really close melodically and everything, and go record it on his own. And he went out and did that, and he shopped it around and couldn't get it done anywhere. And then he came back to doing it with Eddie Davis.
And Farmer John had been originally by, was it Don and Dewey or something?
Don and Dewey, yeah.
It was a different groove. He took that song, turned it into, he wanted to make it into a Louie, used the Sloss and Shuffle kind of background. Voila, national hit. And once again, Billy contributed his ear candy and his novelty ideas. Like, supposedly he's the one that came up with that. Oh, it's in there. And the chaka, 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 chew, bobble, 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 boo. And all these little weird things he'd throw into a thing that makes it more commercial.
I think the whoa, whoa was in the original recording.
Oh, really?
But the chaka, 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 chew stuff, that was Billy. Anyway, when they started trying to record it, they had a lot of problems recording and putting it together. And Eddie Davis called me, and he asked me to help him finalize it, how to fix the recording, because he liked the groove. He wasn't real happy with the vocals, but
that's why they did it. That's why they did gang vocal, right? Everybody singing. Or
well, eventually, that's the only way we found we could fix it. He called me and asked me if I could help him fix the recording. Yeah, Eddie Davis called me, and so I came down to the studio and we got together with putting the gang vocals and the crowd and all the other stuff and to fix Farmer John. And so I helped them do that. But at that time, when we were fixing Farmer John, I wasn't working with Billy Cardenas anymore.
Okay. Now, speaking of the crowd, that's a whole other topic in the sense that, now here's what Billy told me on occasions, that he got the idea to start putting the Screaming Girls on the tracks to make them sound live. And sometimes on the record, it would say recorded live at the Rhythm Room, but it was really recorded at Stereo Masters in Hollywood. But he got the idea from the Trini Lopez live at PJ's, because that was recorded live with a real crowd. It gave an excitement to the record. So Billy liked the idea of making the songs sound live. So he did it to the Blendells hit, La 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 La, brought in the Screaming Girls. He did it with the Premiers. And with my band, he had us get around a mic after we recorded and just start yelling to create excitement. No, I don't think any of your records had the screaming, did they?
No, actually, I hate to counter Billy's story, which I'm really.
Okay, what's your story?
The crowd came about after we had a meeting with Eddie Davis and Rudy Benavides, who was a real help to everything that Eddie Davis did. He worked at a record store. I forget what it was called. Is it Dolphins of Hollywood? I don't know. Anyway, so he again assisted Eddie Davis and gave him ideas. And there was a lot of problems with the recording. I don't know what it was. There was some mic feedback and vocals weren't really strong. And Eddie Davis, and through that all, we came out the idea, let's cover it with a crowd. And then and that's where the covering with the crowd thing came. It wasn't a Billy Cardenas dream. I'm sorry. And also
it was actually to mask some of the deficiencies.
Yeah, because Billy really liked, more than anything, he liked the groove that John Perez put down on the drums, and he wanted to keep it. He wanted to save it. So anything to fix that. So then the idea came. We were opening, working on a place called the Rhythm Room in Fullerton, and they were decided Eddie Davis again. Eddie Davis had some great ideas. He was like P.T. Barnum. He was always coming up with his harebrained ideas, and he decided, well, let's call it Recorded Live at the Rhythm Room, and that became the tag because he could promote the group. He could create his own live sound like the Motown sound, and he could promote the club all at the same time.
Now tell me, answer this: was every record that said "Live at the Rhythm Room" really recorded there or not? No, they weren't all.
Like I said, some parts of the album for Farmer John, I don't know how much of it we saved, but we recorded a lot of their album at the Rhythm Room.
Okay, so somewhere.
And we did have a semi crowd, like about 20 people there screaming and stuff like that. Billy saying, had anybody seen Coach Picker or Harry?
Right.
That was recording at the Rhythm Room, but it wasn't a dance. It was like during the day we were doing it, but there were too many problems with the microphones and leak throughs and stuff like that. So most of that recording, I don't know how much of it we saved. We went back into the studio to do the rest of it. It really wasn't working. The room didn't have the right acoustics. It was echoing all over the place. Yeah. But some of it was recording at the Rhythm Room. Some of that is true. But
and Cannibal the Headhunters' huge hit "Land of a Thousand Dances" was recorded at Stereo Masters, but they added a crowd to that one too.
Yeah, it was recorded at Stereo Masters.
Yeah,
we had the crowd there that crowd was by accident. It was Billy was managing the Rhythm Playboys. Cannibal was fronting the Rhythm Playboys, and they were backing Cannibal and the Headhunters. And Billy and Eddie had some kind of problem that went on. I don't know what the thing was. Billy had falling out with everybody because he really wanted to control everything. He thought he was Napoleon Bonaparte or something. Anyway,
probably had the height complex as well, like Napoleon. He was a short guy.
I don't know.
He was pretty short. By the way, he just passed away this year, as you know.
Yeah, I know. We could go over that later. I tell you, I may say some stuff about Billy, but I will always love Billy. He forced me to do things that I didn't intend to do, and if he hadn't been so motivated to make himself famous, I would never be doing. We wouldn't be talking today. I wouldn't be doing any of the stuff I did. Yeah. So I got to appreciate that he saw something in me that I didn't possibly know was there, and I was eventually able to continue with it. I was going to tell. Cannibal and the Headhunters. What happened was they scheduled a session and everything, and the Headhunters have been to my house, and we've been rehearsing, and we've been doing all kinds of stuff, getting ready for it. And then the night of the session, in fact, I wasn't even going to be involved in a recording session because Billy was going to be there, and so I knew what they were doing, but I didn't say nothing about it. And then I get a call from Eddie. He says, "Max, you need you down to Stereo Masters," and it was like, by this time I had become like Mr. Fix-It, to come with my little toolbox, my guitar, my amplifier,
first aid kit.
My first aid kit to fix whatever Eddie needed fixing. And because he basically told me that there was a little bit of a prejudice kind of thing there, that he didn't really respect. He talks about being the East Side Sound and the East Side Band and Mr. Gordo of Chicano Sound or whatever, but he didn't really. He felt that we were really a bunch of incompetent musicians. And
you're talking about Eddie Davis, right?
Yeah, Eddie Davis. Yeah. So basically, he would call me and say, I need your help. You're the only one that could communicate with them. And so I would come down and I would help. And
Communicate with the natives, please.
well, there came a time where he actually told me, he says, Max, I'm not going to do any more East LA cruise unless you offer to help me with it. You know, he didn't offer to pay me. I didn't want to really be paid, but I'll tell you what it came to me is that what I saw was that I remember that I wanted to make this record for my mother, and I remember the look on her face when I handed it to her, and that really, she was so proud. One little record, who cares if it sells 10 or 15 or 20? She could put it in a frame and put it on the wall and said, Mijo did it, you know? And what I saw was that Eddie Davis had all these roots from East LA. He wasn't really interested in that much recording it. He was willing to bring him in and try. But I saw that the fact, maybe some of these groups, some of the stuff, it really isn't going to be a big giant hit record. But I saw their mother. I saw their mothers. I saw their families having an heirloom, a little 45 record that today I bet there's many homes in East LA that have that 145 record
framed
in a prominent place in the living room, because I went and helped these guys, you know, because I went in there and did it. And for me, that's what I saw. I said, maybe this I could see all the mothers being happy. And I loved my mother. I was raised by my mother. And it's just like I can see all these mothers being so thankful that their kids wasn't a prison record. It was a phonograph record. And so anyway, so get back to Land of a Thousand Dances. He calls me, I bring in my little guitar and my amplifier, and I go down there, and we made phone calls to all the musicians I knew, all the romancers.
But to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, the Rhythm Playboys were there to back up Cannibal. As a matter of fact, Cannibal had been lead vocalist for the Rhythm Playboys for a while before he was calling himself Cannibal. But because of Billy's falling out with Eddie, supposedly he pulled the group. So that's why the Blendells were called in. They literally called, come on down. And Billy Watson was there, the bass player. He stayed from the Rhythm Playboys. I think he stayed. The Blendells came in, and they backed Cannibal. Yeah,
the only member of the Rhythm Playboys that showed up was Billy Watson, and we didn't have a band, so the Blendells were there, and there were several other musicians. And Mark, to this day, I can't tell you who all the musicians were because there was a lot of them.
Well, I know Rudy Valona was on there playing lead guitar. I know Mike Rincon was playing bass there was two basses along with Billy Watson.
We used two bass players, and I'm told that's the first time that was ever done.
Yeah, and it must have been the drummer, Ron Shippers of the Blendells, and it must have been who was the other guy? Tommy Esparza maybe on rhythm guitar, but maybe there's additional musicians. Were there more than that?
Yeah, there was a ton of musicians, and Blendells didn't have a horn section. The trumpet that they used on La 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 was the trumpet player from the Romancers, Ralph Ventura. They didn't have a horn section. In fact, Joe Whiteman, we mentioned Joe Whiteman earlier. Joe Whiteman was also a romancer, and he was a sax player on the Premier's record. And
Duffy's Blues.
He also wrote Duffy's Blues and played sax there, but he played baritone sax on Farmer John. Mm-hmm. So he was a romancer in the Premiers. So yeah, I don't know who the musicians were. There's a lot of horns in there. I don't know where they came from. But the main thing that occurred that night, another one of those little roads and things in the road that I think made the record, was the fact that a lot of the musicians had their girlfriends with them that night. They were all partying, doing their things. They came in to do a gig, and we have this whole studio. Well, now this time we had a synthetic crowd that we didn't even intend to have, and we're trying to build the arrangement for the song, because Frankie had already done an arrangement with the Rhythm Playboys. Now we have to do a new arrangement. Everything that we did on Land of a Thousand Dances was done that night in the studio with Frankie and me telling people to hum this and do that. And the girls were sitting back in there. And after a while, you always tell everybody to be quiet in the studio. But when we were rehearsing and practicing, I came into the control room, and Bruce Morgan was trying to set up the microphones. He was complaining because Frankie kept dancing around, but we were listening to him, because in the background we could hear all these girls singing na 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 na, and I looked over, and Tony Valdez was there that night, and he would probably tell you. He looks to me, sounds like a Gregorian chant, he says to me. I don't know what a Gregorian chant is, but I had the same thought. It was like
Monks, a bunch of chanting monks.
yeah, anyway, there was something going on there. And I turned around and I look at Bruce Morgan. He says, yeah. And he went out to the studio and set up overhead mics and told the girls, go ahead and sing. Everybody sing. That's going to be good. And I think that sound was made the record.
A lot of excitement.
And it was almost like a Phil Spector sound. And I remember one day I was at, I don't know where I was, and this guy from Texas walked up to me and he says, Ruben Molina says you produced Land of a Thousand Dances. I said, yeah, I did. He says, no, you didn't. It was Phil Spector. And it was an insult and a compliment at the same time.
Yeah, right. I've been told by several sources that the bass line was kind of taken from Stevie Wonder's Fingertips. Doom, 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 doom. You know, it's very similar.
It's very, very so. I don't know. It's like anything to me. It was just another gig, you know, because I was always doing flying by the pants gigs, and we were always recording stuff
Flying by the pants
and writing stuff how it's going and take a solo and do this, you know.
Speaking of Bruce Morgan, the engineer at Stereo Masters, it was called Stereo Masters. It was one of the first stereo studios, you know, in Hollywood, and he was a pioneer in that. Oh, yeah. And he recorded the Beach Boys really early on, their first recordings.
In the same studio.
Same studio. And Billy took us in March of '65. He took my band, Mark and the Escorts, into Stereo Masters with Bruce Morgan. And we did Get Your Baby. And we wound up doing 2 singles there that year. But so we worked there as well. A great place. I remember it very well.
Yeah, Bruce was a good guy. You know, his mother composed, thing called Confidential, I think it was. Confidential. I forget what the guy's name. Oh, I can't remember his name, but it was an R&B hit record, and she had a couple of them that she wrote.
You know, I spoke with Bruce Morgan about 10 years ago. I don't know, a long time ago. I got his number, and he was living in Nevada somewhere, like in the hills of the mountains somewhere in Nevada. And I talked to him for like a half hour, and he spoke very fondly of his memories of those sessions with East L.A. bands. The Midnighters recorded there. I mean, so many of the East L.A. bands recorded there, and he had great memories of it, and we talked about it. And I'm sorry, he's probably gone by now. I haven't heard, but
yeah, I think there's a place called Mount Charleston. It's a mountain up here, and he lived up there. He liked it up there because it snowed, and he liked to ski.
Did he pass away already, or do you know?
I really don't know. Last time I talked to him, he had just had a quadruple bypass.
Oh, geez.
And excuse me,
well, he's got to be pretty ancient, because we're pretty ancient, and he was already much older than us then. We were kids. He was a man already.
He was still legally going through legal things, trying to get his rights to the Beach Boys, the recordings that they had at that time. He hadn't got them back. He eventually did get them, but I hadn't spoke to him yet about that.
You know, there's another thing we should expand upon. We've mentioned Eddie Davis a lot. Eddie Davis. He was a white dude. He happened to be Jewish, and he somehow met Billy Cardenas, and they created this great unholy relationship, which bore a lot of fruit. But boy, it was, you know, they couldn't have been more opposite. Billy, pretty much a semi-cholo from East L.A. with those kind of attitudes, and this Jewish guy from Hollywood. And, you know, they didn't always get along, but look what they did together. Eddie owned 8 small independent record labels at some point, and the East LA bands were recording on those labels, right? Pharaoh, Linda, Valhalla, Gordo, Linda, you know, I don't know, a bunch of them. I don't know if you know all of them. But so Eddie had the labels, Billy was finding and gathering up the bands, and it created this thing, and which created 3 national hits in the mid-'60s. And eventually the Cannibal the Headhunters toured with the Beatles, played Shea Stadium. The Blendells did the Dick Clark tours, and, you know, the Premiers toured, and, you know, a lot of success came out of that relationship between those 2 guys.
Yeah, it began with Eddie Davis had his band, The Mixtures. They were doing
from Ventura.
Yeah, they were doing shows at the Whitefront store on weekends. They had
in East LA there on Olympic.
Yeah, well, I don't know where it was.
I think so. Yeah.
They had a TV show, you know, in a little small station.
Channel 13, was it Channel 13?
I think it was, yeah, KCOP. Yeah. and they and Billy saw him, so Billy went down there and started trying to sell Eddie Davis on his bands, which was only the Romancers. And we eventually went and did a gig for him out at Pomona. I forget what that place is. I'm sure you know it.
Rainbow Gardens.
Rainbow Gardens, yeah. And that's where. And so we came out and did a show at Rainbow Gardens. And Eddie, I'm told it was in David Reyes told me it's in his book Land of a Thousand Dances that when he heard the Romancers band, that's when he heard his East L.A. sound, and that's the sound that he wanted to recreate. And unfortunately, at the time, because I had already been through all this legal stuff, I couldn't really record for anybody. And Eddie asked me at the time, he said, well, "What are you doing instrumentals for?" And I told him a story. Max Uballez can't record anything. And that's when he came up with, he was a pretty smart guy too. He says, well, Max Uballez cannot record, but it's okay if Max Uballez is a singer for the Romancers band. Don't need to mention him.
That's right.
So that's what he started to try to get me to record for him. I still didn't want to do it. And I still but I was helping him with other groups. And one day he comes up with the fact, he said, listen, why should you be writing all these songs and just putting them in the closet and nobody's recording them? Why don't you just record them yourself? And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a record label. And that's when he came up with Linda Records. And he had a little drawing of a woman with her hair twisted up done. And it was basically a gift to me. It was my own record label with my wife's picture on it. And that's how we did Linda Records. So, of course, the ownership of that is kind of up in the nebula somewhere because it's mine, but there was no paperwork. There was never any paperwork.
Yeah, never any paperwork. We never signed anything. Did you guys sign when you did the Sloss and Shuffle? Did you sign contracts?
Did I what?
Did you sign contracts when you recorded Sloss and Shuffle?
No contracts.
Yeah.
No anything. I tell you one thing about contracts is that after that whole thing that happened with You'd Better, finding me to sign a contract somewhere was going to be pretty difficult. And I didn't figure anything of the stuff was going to be any big time or worth fighting over, And that was reinforced when I met Chuck Berry many years later. He had just gotten out of prison and we were sitting there. Boy, he was like a caged animal. He was real. I mean, he'll look at you like he's going to pull a gun on you any minute, We were backing him up at the Legion Stadium, and the Legion Stadium didn't have any dressing rooms. And what they used to do is they had these metal poles put around and curtain hanging over them. Mm-hmm. I went over to Chuck Berry's curtain and entered to talk with him about what songs he wanted to do. And he kind of looked at me like he was going to pull out a gun and shoot my head off. But we got to talking, and he says, "Oh yeah, he likes Sloss and Shuffle." And he says, "Most importantly, what kind of amplifier you got?" And I said, "I got a Fender concert." And he said, "Oh, good. That's the only amp I'll work through." So he felt good about me, and he said, we started talking. One of the things that he gave me guidance on, he says, "I'll tell you, kid, did you sign a contract? Did you sign a contract for that song?" I said, "No, I didn't." He says, "Never sign a publishing contract." And he told me about Maybelline and what had happened to him because he ripped off. And at that point, he still hadn't received his publishing.
Right.
Some guy named Alan Reed stole it.
Now he was talking publishing contract, and I agree with that. But most of us, I mean, virtually all of us groups, we didn't sign artist contracts with the labels.
Right.
And most of us didn't care because we were thrilled to make a record. Right. We were so happy and excited to make a record. It was a contract, money, who cares? We're recording. So we just go in and record.
Yeah. It was kind of an exciting thing. So that was good that he said that. And of course, years later, I find that many of my songs have been placed in on television shows and movies and stuff like that without my permission. And it's been like a little battle to get payment for them. In fact, that movie Judy has one of my songs, "Take My Heart," and I didn't even know it was in there until one of my cousins called me and said, "Hey, I saw your name on this movie." What movie?
Was it a Romancers recording?
Yes, Romancers recording. And the romancers on that particular recording were Manuel Mosqueda on drums, Manuel Rodriguez, who they call Magoo, on bass, Bobby Hernandez on guitar, and myself. That's the only, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, Bobby Hernandez was kind of the main lead guitar player when you started doing the vocal records, like
when I started, everything on Linda Records is Bobby Hernandez on guitar, although there have been places where it's other people have taken credit. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about El Monte Legion Stadium. This flyer's on my website. I just kind of made a copy off the website, but it's an El Monte Legion Stadium flyer. Now you're not on this one, but it just kind of shows what was going on. This was God knows what year it was, early 60s. But here's the lineup: Rosie and the Originals, Shirley and Lee, Joe Houston, sax player, Ron Holden, the Penguins, Earth Angel, Tony Allen, Little Barbara, Carlos Brothers, Chicanos, Johnny Flamingo, Jeanette Baker, Robert and Johnny, You're Mine and We Belong Together, Marvin and Johnny. Plus, for the entire evening, dance to the Midnighters. Actually, this has to be around at least 65 because the Midnighters is spelled with the Niters. That came a little later, 65. So this was 65. And there you go. So let's talk about your experiences at the El Monte Legion Stadium and who you played with, who you backed up, because you guys played there a lot, right?
Yeah, Monte Legion Stadium, we backed all those people you just mentioned, and Chuck Berry, and that little Stevie Wonder was there.
Wow.
The Four Seasons.
Wow.
And actually, El Monte Legion Stadium was a beginning and an ending, because that's when Billy and I
had the falling out
relationship, because Billy had some kind of a hassle with Hal Zager, who was the promoter there. And Hal Zager, I guess he also managed Ray Charles and Little Richard. And something happened with Billy and Hal, and one day Billy called me and said, there was advertisements on KRLA saying the Romancers Saturday night. Huggy Boy was the MC at that time. Saturday night. And Billy called me and says, you're not going to play there Saturday night. And I said, why am I not going to play there Saturday night? He says, because I don't want you to. And he, like he did with Cannibal the Headhunters and the Rhythm Playboys, he would pull a band whenever he wanted to. And in all the years, in the couple of years that we were together, he had never asked me to do that or never ordered me to do that. And he was kind of feeling his oats, because at that time we had just released Farmer John, and it was starting to break. And he was thinking, gee, I don't need Max anymore. Why don't I jump in right now? So he knew that I would tell him, I'm not going to skip a gig. I don't care what you got to say. So he tried to break up my band. And he got Andy Tesso and Armando to go with him somewhere. And then that's when Chris's brother Jimmy became a Romancers, part of the Romancers band. So we called Hal Zager. I told him, I can't do the gig. I don't have a band. And Billy, he already knew what happened with Billy already. So he says, listen, Max, he says, you come down there with your guitar, your broomstick, whatever. You got a gig with me whenever you want. So I did put a band together, and which was at the time just four of us, Jimmy, Pasquale, Chris Pasquale, myself, and Manuel Mosqueda. And we became the band for El Monte Legion Stadium.
Like a house band, right?
Yeah, we were the house band, and we're backing in work. Some people we didn't back, some people we just were there when they did it, but all the people that you mentioned, we were there with them and more. Yeah.
Hey, well, tell the story. You told me this story like within the last year or so. I mean, recently, the fact that Billy, he had that cholo in him, that tough guy thing, and he kind of showed up that night to intimidate. Yeah. Tell that story.
I was backstage doing something. I forget what I was doing. And Jimmy Pasquale comes up to me and says, "Hey, Max, you better get up to the ticket office." So it was a big, Monte Legion was a big place. So I ran across the thing and went out to front where the ticket office was. And Hal Zager was there sitting in this little office like that, where he took money and stuff like that. And Billy was standing there, and he had a big gang of guys behind him. and he came there to tell Hal, if he let the Romancers play that night, that there would be a problem. And you know, Hal was obviously a Chicago gangster, and you just don't talk to people like that way.
He
And
out gangstered him, I think, didn't he?
he out gangstered him now, and Billy just backed off because Hal just like stood up to him and said, go around saying things like that. You could be hit by a truck someday,
Ooh.
And Billy backed off and walked away, but he tried to gangster the guy. And Billy showed up here periodically when I was doing gigs somewhere, trying to stop me, and it kind of hurt because I'll tell you, I will always love Billy, but he was like a bad big brother, and he knew no other way than to be forceful that way. That was his way of doing. He used to be a boxer, so.
Yeah. And he was also very possessive of his groups. He did that to us one time. There was a rival promoter in East L.A. named Johnny J. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh yeah, I know Johnny very well.
Yeah. So Johnny J booked us at this gig, and it was like 20 bands. I'm not kidding. It was an Easter Sunday thing, like in '64 or so. And he wanted us to play it. I said yes. I would get the calls. We had no manager. I mean, well, Billy was our manager, but he got us some gigs, but we were free to get other gigs. And I got a call from this guy. I said, yeah. And he put us like really high on the bill. In fact, I think we were on the top of this bill. And somehow Billy found out, and he called me up and he goes, "You're not playing there." I said, "Why not? I'm your manager. If you play that gig, I won't be your manager anymore." So and that's the only gig we never showed up to. He did. His threat worked with us.
Really important. Johnny J was a good guy. Johnny J had done some really good promoting in Boyle Heights. In fact, Johnny J is the first guy that got things going at the Paramount Ballroom. Billy kind of pressed him out of territory,
Yeah.
Yeah, he kind of leveraged Johnny out of it. Johnny initially was trying to help us, but Billy pushed him out. He had that deal at the Paramount Ballroom with the promoters. Were Sal was part of Sal and Margie, who also used to work with us.
Sal Murillo.
His mother was the promoter at the Paramount Ballroom, or his parents were, and Billy developed some new partnership with him and kind of leveraged Johnny J out so they could do this teen nightclub thing. But Johnny J is the guy who started doing the teen dances at the Paramount Ballroom.
Oh, no, I never went to one of those, and I never played at one of those. My dad was the house band at the Paramount in the 50s. Before all that happened, he was like for several years, maybe 5 years, he was the house band there. But then it turned into like a rock venue, and the East Side Sound Band started playing there. And Stevie Wonder famously played there once, and right, Sonny and Cher as Caesar and Cleo and all that stuff. And you guys used to play there, right? Quite a bit.
Yeah, we played at the first couple of dances that they did there. Wherever we opened up, the Romancers always started it out. Thing is that I read saw something recently on the web that I guess they got some new promoters there now, and
they've refurbished the place totally. It's kind of nice.
And they're promoting that Sonny and Cher used to live upstairs, which is just not true. Sonny and Cher were there, and that's when they were Caesar and Cleo. Because again, we met Sonny Bono when he was delivering meat.
Right. And Sal Murillo, we're talking about Sal and Marge, who used to sing there. Sal later became the lead singer for the Blendells.
Yeah. And I guess that became a problem for the Blendells. I don't know. I've heard little rumbles about that, but that's not my story. But yeah, it was and now it's called the historic Paramount Ballroom.
Yeah.
And and the first thing that comes up is we had Stevie Wonder there and stuff like that. And
the Premier's backed him apparently here.
Got a lot of those oldie groups down there. In fact, we worked with Don Julian and the Meadowlarks. We were doing stuff there, and that got myself and my bass player Magoo. We did some helped Don with some recordings, and he did a hit record by a group called the Larks, which was now
Yes.
Meadowlarks, the Larks, the Jerk.
Yes.
And on that record, you got me and Magoo.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
we're on that record, and I think Magoo did another one for, I think, who was that DJ? Daddy's Home. I forget what the group was. Daddy's Home.
Yeah, great song.
He's the bass player on that.
Mhm.
And we were working with a lot of different people, other than the local East L.A. bands.
Yeah. So you played there quite a bit, at the Paramount. Let's talk about Rainbow Gardens. Now that had that has quite a history. Back in the 40s, Rainbow Gardens in Pomona had like the big bands, Harry James and stuff like that. Then somewhere in the early 50s, somewhere in there, they had like the great Latin bands would come, like the Tito Puentes or those kind of from New York. But and by the early 60s, it was like a rock and roll venue, and it had like weekend gigs Saturday night, and the Mixtures used to play there. They became like almost a house band, Eddie Davis's Mixtures from Ventura. And I think, didn't you guys play those weekend dances there too during that phase?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. When Billy first met Eddie Davis, he was selling him the Romancers band, and Eddie was aware of the Southern Shuffle, so he thought we were an instrumental band. And the first night we played there, was a kind of interesting thing. I mentioned to you earlier that the first time I saw Johnny and Crowns was at the Times Boys Club.
Mm-hmm.
That night, they were giving away records, like 45s that were donated by various record companies. And I got this record, and it was on Feral Records, I think it was. And it ended up to be an Eddie Davis production. He told me that was the first record he put out, called So You Want to Dance. But on the backside of it was a song called I Want to Be a TV Cowboy. And I really liked that song. And I liked it because I don't know if you remember us, but part of what I used to do is tell jokes in between songs or tell stories or do stupid little things. And this song had a monologue to it. So the first night that we played for Eddie at Rainbow Gardens, I did I Want to Be a TV Cowboy. And Eddie came running up to the stage and saying, "Where did you get that song? And how did you do your arrangement?" And I told him, "Well, I don't know about arrangement. It's just, I just play things the way they come out, And I told him the story of how I got that record. And he was really, really excited. But, I'm told that that's the night that he thought he heard his East Side sound. And that's when he began trying to get me to record from it. And like Billy told him, and I told him I couldn't do any recording. He wasn't interested in pedals. But later on, it went full circle, and he found out he didn't really know how to communicate with the East Side bands. And like you said, I had to go in and take care of the what you call them. Anyway, I was really interested in doing that, and during like in 1965, I think I did like produced about 30 records for Eddie, also including working in production of the Farmer John album and the Land of a Thousand Dances album, and wrote several songs for Cannibal and the guys, and for the Cricketers.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second. I have it written down here. I was going to say, before we get off Rainbow Gardens, so there was that period where it was weekends and the place was packed, but I don't know how this happened, but this is where I played there with you on two occasions. But they started having this Sunday night tardeada. Remember that? It was like from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. kind of shift. And all of us, East L.A., all the Billy Cardenas bands would go play there. And they didn't even print flyers for this. They would just handwrite with a marker who's going to be there that night, stick it in the box office. And I always had a thing where I like to save flyers, because I always thought I'd love to have these when I get old. I want to have these memories and mementos. And thank God I did, because they're all on my website now, all these flyers and stuff. But this was just in the window. I don't know if you can see this. Today, Mark and the Escorts, Desires, and the Romancers.
Wow, I never saw that.
That was the lineup that day. And it just says today. And then here's another one, July 5th. The Romancers, the Blendells, Mark and the Escorts. Added attraction, Dan and the Clean Cut Clan. And then on the bottom, Kosher Pickle Harry. But so I played, and I remember seeing you guys. I have the memory. We were only like 14. We were a young band, and you guys came in, 17 years old or something, and wow, like,
opioid
oh,
man.
holy crap, you guys sounded great. Yeah. So yeah, that was that. So let's get to the yeah, so you started writing songs for some of the other artists, most famously Beaver Shot for the Atlantics.
Oh, I forgot about the Atlantics. Yeah,
Yeah. And didn't Beaver Shot wind up in a movie as well?
yeah. It's the opening, actually the opening credit for a thing called Taco Shop. Really interesting thing about that song is that we were recording, doing a live recording with the Atlantics at the Almonte Community Center or something, and they were recording, and we recorded a song called Fine Fine Fine. But as they reviewed all the music and everything, they didn't have anything that really they needed something else. And so Eddie Davis says, uh, he says, you got any songs for them? I said, well, no, not really. He says, well, it has to be instrumental too. And I said, well, okay, well, when do you want me to do it? He said, well, tonight. And so we packed up the equipment and drove to somewhere. I don't know where it is. I guess Jimmy Mejia, Jimmy Mesa tells me it was a
Guitar player.
he told me there was a mansion somewhere, but I basically wrote that song on the way to that house to record. I'm really proud that Eddie had that kind of belief
Trust in him. Yeah.
that he would take a whole band and take them to a house and set up to do a recording studio to do a recording session of something that they didn't even have yet. And I walked in there and started giving them all their parts, a bass player, a guitar player, the way I always do. And then by the end of the night, we had Beaver Shot.
Now, where'd you come up with that title?
That was Eddie's idea. And
you remember what that meant, right?
Huh?
You remember what it meant at the time?
I didn't really think about it. I really, I hate to tell my grandchildren that I wrote a song called Beaver Shot, but yeah, it ended up being in that. It also ended up being in somebody covered the song Beaver Shot for a movie in Europe, a European movie. And it doesn't sound exactly like what we did, but I got credit for it. And it was a thing called Heaven's Gate, and it was a pretty big movie.
Oh, I remember that.
I don't remember. I never saw it. I never heard it.
I think that's a movie that's considered the most colossal flop in the history of film because they spent like $100 million and it made 20 million, and it was like big stars and big director and major everything. It was a huge bomb.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, they sent me some money, so I was happy for it because I'll tell you, I made more money after the fact from those years because I never got paid anything for doing any of that stuff, and I really wasn't thinking. Like you said, you just wanted to make a record. You didn't think about it a business.
Play gigs. But
Billy and Eddie were making money.
Somebody was making money.
We weren't. So anyway, it's unbelievable the stuff that we went through. But I have a very large catalog of stuff that I've worked on that I can say I did that.
What about the premieres? You wrote some songs for the premieres as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I wrote several songs for the premieres. Eddie wanted me to write a follow-up to Farmer John, and his title was Annie Oakley. So I wrote a song called Annie Oakley for him so they can do as a follow-up. And it really wasn't too bad. It could have worked, but it didn't anyway. And I also wrote another one of those middle of the night calls later on years after Farmer John. Eddie was in the recording studio that was owned by Emperor Bob Hudson, and was
he was funny, yeah.
And Casey Kasem. They were in a partnership, owned the studio somewhere off of Silver Lake somewhere. And Eddie called me one night. He says, "Max, I need you to come down here." And I said, "Okay, you need me down there." He says, we need to write this song." So they were laying down a track for Get on This Plane. So I came in with my little toolbox and helped George Delgado finish the song Get on This Plane, which turned out very, very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really good recording. And that's another thing, that's something that we get consistent airplay on, and it's on rotation on some airplanes.
Yeah.
I get royalties to American Airlines.
Now you also worked with Little Ray Jimenez, the great Little Ray.
Yeah.
Was it a swim record or something, or what was it?
Yeah, it was. Well, actually, we did this track. Billy was really excited with the really intrigued and how would I say tied to the Stevie Wonder sound. And we did this instrumental track. He was going to just do an instrumental. So we did this instrumental track. And we ended up using that instrumental track. We put Ray on it and called it Come Swim With Me.
Okay.
But we also used it for a couple other people. I forget who else we recorded.
Same track?
Huh?
Use the same track for different artists, different songs?
We used that track because Billy loved that track. It was like his big work of art, you know. He contributed. He didn't really ever contribute musically to anything very often, but that one he loved. He really thought that had to be a hit somehow. And it's not a bad track. It's a good track. So yeah, I wrote a couple songs to that track and produced that record for Little Ray. Yes.
And did you do the B-side as well? It was I think it was another Swim thing on the other side. I don't remember what the
No, he did Karen on the other side.
Oh, Karen. Oh, yeah, that was
his record. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you did that with him. And then what was Sneaking Out the Back Door much later? Is that Macondo?
No, that was Macondo.
Okay, let's not, we'll get to that in a second because there's so many things here. We'll get to that, but let's stick with, we're still in the 60s, we're still romancers. How about this? The great West Coast East Side Review.
Yeah.
Again, I'll read the people that were there. So 1965, at the height of everything, the Blendells had already had their national hit, premieres, Cannibal the Headhunters. So there was a show at the Shrine Auditorium, and on a Sunday day, really. And Dave Hull, the Hullabalooer, KRLA DJ, was the MC. And here's the lineup, all East LA bands. And it looks like virtually all of them, all of them are Billy Cardenas or Eddie Davis bands, except maybe one or two. The Atlantics, the Blendells, the Blue Satins, they were not a Billy Cardenas band, but they were very good, great band. Cannibal the Headhunters, Ronnie and the Casuals, Mark and the Escorts, that was us. The Heartbreakers, the Jaguars, and the Salas Brothers. The Salas Brothers later were the founders of Tierra, a hit group in the early 80s. Band formed in the early 70s. Little Ray, the Little Heartbreakers, the Medallions. Do you remember the Medallions?
No, I don't.
Yes, so they might not have been a Billy band. The Midnighters, they weren't a Billy band. The Pageants, they were. Do you remember the Pageants?
Yeah, I recorded it. I wrote a song for them too called Keep Talking, I'll remember later.
Okay. Here's the Premiers, the Four Queens, four-girl band. They were the only female band.
We're from El Sereno, yeah, Billy band.
Yeah. I met her a few years ago. I met her, talked to her on the phone, but she was very reluctant to do interviews or anything like that. So, but I did talk to her. She's around. They went on to record for Capitol. They changed their name and they did some things for Capitol. The Romancers, the Sisters, leads Ursi Arvizu was one of the lead singers, and she wound up being an El Chicano later and working for Ry Cooder years later in the 2000s. The Slauson Brothers, that was the Ochoa brothers, George and John Ochoa. George wound up being one of our lead singers in my band, The Men from Sound, in the mid-60s. And he went on to be with Yaki and sang with Cannibal, who was one of the Headhunters after the original guys left. He went to New York with Cannibal in 1968. Him and Eddie Serrano became the Headhunters. So anyway, there's quite a list of bands here and singers. February 15th, 1965. General admission $1.75, reserved $2. So what do you remember about that day?
That show, that album cover you showed earlier, when I told you the Romancerettes, was taken at that show. That picture, the cover for that East Side Sound album.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At the Shrine Auditorium.
Okay.
That Oh, Pageants, I wrote a thing called Sad and Lonely that I produced a record for them, Sad and Lonely.
Hey, while I was digging over here, I found here was the sequel to the Slauson Shuffle album, Do the Slauson. This was Let's Do the Swim, the Romancers, on Bob Keane's label. Now, again, you guys sound professional and it sounds really good. To me, it wasn't as good as the first album, but it was cool.
That was one of the, I didn't even want to do that album. Billy was, I'll tell you something that I've learned later on is that every time we did an album, Billy collected money.
I don't know.
So I think he needed to make another $50 or something like that. He was doing that for Crown Records. He would take these trios or mariachi bands into Crown Records, and they would pay him a $50 finder's fee.
Finding fee.
So he
So
was to do that album, and I'll tell you, that was also just put together in the studio. We had nothing to record, But Billy said, "Ah, you could do it, Max."
yeah, did it before. So again, for further clarification, the Slauson album the Slauson was a very hip in dance at the time, around 64. I mean, that was the dance in East LA, the Slauson. It was very simple. You would just kick your right leg, do a couple of steps, kick your right leg. But Slauson Shuffle was the perfect beat. Louie Louie was the perfect beat to do the Slauson to. And so that was a dance craze. I don't think it went national. I don't think so, but it sure was big in LA and East LA with the Black community and Chicano community, I believe.
I really don't know what it did or like I say, I wasn't aware of any of that stuff, but
So they told you to write something about to do a Slauson album and you didn't even know what it was?
Billy came up with the idea of doing a Slauson Shuffle. I mean, he told Bob Keane that he was saying, well, we'll do an album, because at the time we did the Slauson Shuffle, Bob Keane was doing a bunch of surf albums, and he said, well, you guys do an instrumental, let's do we call it the Slauson Shuffle because that's a big dance in East LA. Yeah. And so the song became called the Slauson Shuffle. But when I took it in there to record it, I didn't have a title for it. We just called it the Slauson Shuffle because it happened to be a good dance. It was a good idea.
And I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing the name Slauson came from Slauson Avenue. Maybe that's where it started. Might have started in the Black community. Anyway, so the follow-up album was another dance craze, The Swim. But The Swim wasn't considered a hip dance or anything. I mean, maybe some people would do that. Remember the old, like you're drowning, but it didn't catch on that big. But anyway, it was a national thing. People did The Swim, but it wasn't considered like a cool dance or anything. But so I guess that was the thing. Well, you did a Slauson album. Now do another dance craze album to do the Swim. The Swim. But by the way, this song on here, Goofy's Rabbits, was just Huggies Bunnies backwards.
Right. The riff the other way, yeah. Well, that's to show you how much material that we had to put in there, and just also at that time, as Bob Keane was doing all these surf albums, working with some people who were involved somehow with Crown, the Bahari brothers. They were doing rack jobbing all over the country. Yeah, jobbing's going, putting stuff again in thrifties and stuff like that. So it only seemed natural to, I think, probably do the Swim sold more than do the Slauson, because
really
we didn't have the relationship with them at that time. And do the Swim, it was like you say, it was a national thing. It really wasn't a matter of how good it was. It was the title.
The title and the timing. By the way, so years later, Bob Keane released Romancer's Slauson Shuffle CD that I bought. I probably bought it, the 80s maybe? I don't know. But it has like the best of both albums. And it kind of bugged me because I would have loved to have the original Slauson Shuffle album, all the songs. But it just has songs from both records. Yeah, it's still great. It sounds great.
Yeah, he was mostly doing that out of the stuff he could hold the publishing on,
Yeah.
And I think he always thought that he should have put Patricia in there, because I always liked Patricia.
Yeah, that was great.
A good version of it that was really, really different than the original. I really liked it. And Tough Talk. Those were Tough Talk we got from the Jazz All-Stars, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Here, hold on one second. Let's show another thing here. Here's another random thing that I pulled out. Here's a flyer from the Union Hall. Oh my goodness. December 8th, 1962. Chris Montez and Maximilian.
There you go.
There's Chris Montez, good friend of mine. Had a big hit with Let's Dance, and then later Call Me and The More I See You.
Right.
Originally named Ezekiel Montanez. Another guy had to change his name. And there's Maximilian. So that's Union Hall, 49th Street in the city of Vernon, 1962.
And the Union Hall was near Slauson, so maybe that happened to do it.
Yeah, yeah, something to do it. Yeah, but did you play the Big Union? Well, did you play it as the Romancers too?
Or,
The Big Union on 49th?
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we used to play there a lot too. Gigantic Union Hall, big room, high ceiling, long, skinny stage. Remember that stage? It went
Yeah.
across back to the whole room. You could probably set up 3 bands on it. But I played there a bunch of times with Mark and the Escorts, and it was great. And about a year ago, I went looking for it. I went to the address, and it's now a completely different building. It's history, man.
The warehouse. Yeah.
Yeah. But I have been back to the other venues. I've been back to the Little Union a few years ago. It was the same on Goodrich in East LA there. I went to the Montebello Ballroom, and it's exactly the same. It turned into a Spanish language music venue, but it's the same stage, the same upper stage, everything's the same. St. Alphonsus Auditorium, last time I was in there, identical, same stage, same floor. That was a few years ago. Kennedy Hall, CYO Hall. I've been in most of those places in recent years, and they're the same. It blows me away. But in the case of the Big Union, gone. El Monte Legion Stadium, gone. Rainbow Gardens, gone.
We were always working. It was a lot of fun and everything, but half those places I don't even know where they're at. Like recently, somebody told me, "Hey, you played for out in this place on Durfee Road one time, and you guys were one of the guys from the Blue Satin sent me a thing on Facebook. His name is Robert. He said, I remember you guys came out here and played on Durfee Road, he said. You guys did a gig there. You were really rocked. And I don't even remember being.
Yeah, I don't remember certain gigs. We played with Billy. One of the first gigs we got through Billy Cardenas was the Bel Air Roller Drum in Pico Rivera. Did you ever play there?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
When we played, we were on the bill with the Blendells, I remember, and they were great. We used to love the Blendells. And I saw Mike Rincon recently. We went to visit Billy right before he passed. Mike Rincon of the Blendells, me and Lawrence Perez of the Premiers, we went down there. And I was talking to Mike about it. He goes, oh, I don't remember playing that place. I said, I got the flyer. I remember it, but he didn't remember. But, you know, I mean, we played so many gigs, it's hard to remember every place we played.
Yeah, it's really hard to remember where you've been, you know, and it's always a good excuse when you meet girls, too.
Yes, it is. And
I don't think I was there.
Right, there you go. So when you started recording the vocal things with the Romancers, and you got away with it by not saying who you were, you're the lead vocalist for the Romancers. You recorded several singles for Bob Keane, and the most notable is My Heart Cries, which was a cover of an Etta James record. And tell me how that happened and what you did with it.
Actually, we didn't initially intend to record it, but Tony Valdez was working at the record rack.
Record rack, yeah.
Periodically suggests, tell me, hey, why don't you try this song? Why don't you try that song? So he one day I was at the record rack doing something, and he says, hey, listen to this. You guys should try this song. And he played My Heart Cries for me, and I told him, okay, I'll take it. And then what I did is I went home and I handed it to Magoo in one of our rehearsals and said, learn the chord changes and stuff, and we'll do this song. I basically really liked the sound. I confess to never really learning songs that we covered. I have real good memory for melody and lyrics. So I remember melody and lyrics, but all the other stuff I would just put together to make it fit what I was thinking about. And My Heart Cries, similar thing. I like the lyrics because going right back to my beginnings of when I decided to make a record, Eliseo and Los Camperos did a song called La Noche y Tú. And the song was about the grandeur and you and love and the universe and all that other stuff. And the lyrics to My Heart Cries sounded like that to me. And I'd always wanted to do something that saluted our music, our roots. And so I love the words of My Heart Cries because it seemed to be an English version of that song.
So when you first learned it, were you learning with the idea of just playing it on the gigs or to record it?
Just to do it on the gig. I really wasn't thinking of recording it. And but then I got this grandiose idea of adding mariachi violins to it and stuff like that. And Eddie was open to recording whatever I wanted to record. All I need to do is call him and tell him, Eddie, I got something I want to record. He'll say, tell me when you want the date. Didn't want to hear what I was going to do. He just let me record what I wanted to do, which is, I'm really pleased that both Bob Keane and Eddie Davis have such confidence in me that all I need to do is call and say, I want the studio. They say, come on in and I'll go do it.
Pretty cool.
And I was thinking that we'll go ahead and put this down. And as I went through it, I realized I really can't put any mariachi strings or horns or things in it because it really doesn't fit the melody. So I decided to do multiple harmony voices and melodies. In fact, Eddie Davis sings on that song.
I heard. Was he one of the high parts?
Yeah. Well, Bob Hernandez does most of the high parts. There's a couple high parts that Eddie Davis does because he had that really nice little boy sound to the high part. You can also hear that in Cannibal and the Headhunters. I think it's a song. It's the Larry Tamblyn song. I'm thinking about it. Something about as a melody. This is "Here Comes Love" was a Cannibal and the Headhunters. Eddie Davis is on that too. That same high falsetto voice.
And Larry Tamblyn was later in the Blendells.
Yeah.
Dirty Water.
Yeah, and so Bob Hernandez does most of the high parts, but Eddie Davis is blended in there too. And by that time, Bruce Morgan had a 3-track machine, so we could do a little bit of messing around with it, similar like what the Beach Boys did. So both Bob Hernandez and Eddie Davis are sharing that part. So
nice harmony arrangements, beautiful harmony arrangements. So My Heart Cries by the Romancers is one of the, East Side Sound classic songs. It lives on, just like Sloss and Shuffle, very cool record.
I was really pleased that Eddie would let me record whatever I wanted. If you go back to the list of the songs I did with the Romancers band on Linda Records, it's a wide breadth of different kind of music. There's a song called "She Got My Oldsmobile" and "Loves the Thing" that are considered one of the earliest punk rock music recorded, and there's still that 45 singles are really like in hot demand by record collectors.
Yeah, it's amazing how some of our singles are worth a lot of money on eBay. I see that all the time.
Yeah. But we did a wide range of music, and but that song was suggested to me by Tony Valdez. I don't know whether he was saying you should record it or whatever.
Yeah.
I really wasn't listening. I just took the record, thanked Tony, went ahead, put it in rehearsal, and I was kind of lackadaisical about what I did musically. I just, if it felt good, I wanted to do it. If it didn't feel good, I wouldn't do it. And I can't say I was actually a producer who thought about what he was doing as much as doing what I felt. And it came out okay.
Yeah, certainly did.
Oh, one more thing. There's a guitar line in My Heart Cries, which is basically what carries the whole song. That guitar line played in that way is Bobby Hernandez's idea. If you listen, it's the same line that Etta James used in her original, but he plays it in a different rhythm. And I think that's what makes the recording. Yeah. And him and Magoo were fighting over it because Magoo said, "Don't play it that way." He said, "This is the way I feel it." But
amazing how such a simple lick can be so important to a song. It's like the Beatles, "And I Love Her." Paul McCartney has recently said that George Harrison came up with da 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 da, and Paul says that made the song, and it's 3 notes.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
Yeah, this is a little lick is what makes it happen, Well, I think about Eddie Davis. I think I need to mention Billy Watson. Who, as you know, was a bass player for Livers and Playboys and was on Land of 1,000 Dances. Eventually evolved into he was running a little recording studio where he had a little 4-track machine, and he used to take guys used to go there and jam after their gigs. And one night, you have El Chicano down there,
right? After their gig, yeah.
They weren't called El Chicano; they're
VIPs.
Yeah, and anyway. And so this was a song that they used for their break. And it was a song they used as the break song that Bobby Loya had told them to do.
Trumpet player.
Trumpet player, yeah. And so they recorded it and everything. And Billy Watson was recording everything. And he was trying to be an engineer. And I used to go down there and mess around with him, mixing and stuff like that. And he came up with a really good mix of this rehearsal recording, which was just their break song. And he was really excited about it, and he took it to Eddie Davis. Eddie Davis liked it. He wanted to release it. And they tried to work out something with the group that recorded it. Anyway,
VIPs.
VIPs, yeah. And anyway, and they weren't interested in doing it. So Eddie decided, I want to release this thing. I really believe in it. Tell you the truth, I didn't like it that much, but Billy Watson, what he did with that little rehearsal tape, his mixing was really magical. And he's the one that made it sound like what it sounded like. It wasn't meant to be that. And Eddie decided they were going to release it. They didn't have a name for the group, and they came up. They figured they called the VIPs and asked them what the song was. They told them it's just something we made up the song. You could have it. We don't care. So they decided to call the song El Chicano, and they went in to mix it. The song title was suggested by Mario Piniawa. Mario, I'm sorry to mention you. Mario doesn't like interviews. He came up with the title El Chicano for the song. They went in to master it, and the guy was in there mastering it. He was listening to it, and he's listening to it, and he does the mastering. He says, what's the song title? He said, and they said, well, call it El Chicano. He says, you can't do that, man. It's just like, well, why not? He says, well, he went out and pulled out an album, Gerald Wilson, El Viva Tirado.
Right.
And it's, oh my God, we thought we had an original here. And it turned out they didn't. So they said, okay, well, let's call the group El Chicano.
Right.
They were originally going to release it as the VIPs, but for some reason, I don't know, I don't want to get involved in all the politics of it, but they ended up calling it an El Chicano. And the story's a story. But I really think that Billy Watson should have got more credit for what he did. That's all.
He engineered it, and it was in his little
engineered the mixing and came up with the idea of something that would have been a throwaway tape that he would just had to happen to leave the tape recorder on.
And that gave El Chicano their career right there, just a little happy accident. And it was recorded released on Cap Records, KAPP, MCA label, and it all happened.
Yep, that's the way it went. But I just needed to get that in for Billy because I think he did so many things, and I was so thankful for him to show up at Land of a Thousand Dances recording also. So,
and he also played with the Premiers for a while.
Yeah, he was a good guy, really, really good.
And he recently passed as well, right?
A few years ago, I remember last time I talked to him, he had diabetes, and I talked to him on the phone. He says, Max, let me give you advice. He was telling me, you're giving me so many advice over the years, Max. I said, yeah, I'm going to give you advice. He says, I'm going to have a knee replacement. He said, don't do it. I said, Billy, he says, they cut off your legs.
Oh, my God.
Fortunately, he passed away soon after.
Mm.
He never got out of bed again. So,
wow.
Good guy, Billy Watson. He was always around helping.
Wow. So now the early 70s come, and things changed, and a lot of groups started to Latinize more. Back in the 60s, we were doing everything from surf music at the beginning to doo-wop to Motown, Stax Volt, British Invasion, psychedelic period. The East L.A. bands were reflecting that in live shows and in our music, and we'd put our sensibility and maybe our cultural things to it a little bit. But it wasn't until sort of the late 60s. The first band that I knew in East LA that really kind of Latinized was the Village Callers. They had the timbales and congas. They were the first group that I heard of to do that. And of course, with Viva Tirado, that was huge. And Santana came out around 69, and then Malo. So, there was a big Latinization of a lot of the Latin American groups. And so Tierra was born in 72, Yaqui. I did an album for A&M, and we wanted our band to be called the Mud Brothers, M-U-D-D. It was funky, it was rock and roll, it was brown, and they go, no, you got to have a Latin sounding name. Oh, geez. So I compromised with Tango, which was a huge, huge mistake because, the album came out with the word tango across. So people would think it's an Argentinian tango album. Why would they think it's rock and roll or a rock band? the word tango had nothing to do with us, and that was a huge mistake. But there was a whole scene going on, and you were up in the Bay Area already, I believe, and you formed a group and called it Macondo, which is a Latin sounding name. But your music, it had some Latin stuff to it. There were a couple of songs that were, but then there were some that sounded like Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So tell me about Macondo and how that got started.
Yeah, actually, Macondo was not intended to be a Latin rock group. What had occurred in my life is by that time I wasn't in the Bay Area. I was still in East L.A., but I had gone through a divorce and was living on my own. And basically, I had basically become a hippie. I bought myself a van and I traveled up the coast. I bought myself a van and a gym membership so I could shower wherever I went, and basically lived on various beaches and all up and down the coast, San Luis Obispo and
Nice.
various beaches north, going all the way up to Northern California. And during that time, I would just periodically step into these little bars and play. And I started writing some songs, and they were basically more bar funk songs. And when I came back to LA, got together with Bob Hernandez, and I said, I think I'm gonna try to record some of this stuff. And I was still unhappy about my divorce, and I basically written this song called "You Can't Make Love Alone." And basically, even though it wasn't my position, I had a problem with my wife, and she was out doing what she was doing. And so, but I decided to write a song like I was dumping her, and I called it "Can't Make Love Alone." So I decided I wanted to record this song. It was a funky song, and Bobby and I started rehearsing. We started putting a band together. We went through several players trying to find something to work. We got together with Magoo from the Romancers originally, but he wasn't interested in doing it. And so we just kind of messed around and had several different players step into the band and out of the band. It didn't work out. And finally, we met up with Fred Ramirez and Lee Pastor and Eddie Caicero. And Bob felt that there was more of a market for Latin bands than there was for rock bands. So basically, I took those funk songs like "Sneaking in the Back Door," "You Can't Make Love Alone," "You're My Battery," which really they're just merely hard rock songs.
Mm-hmm.
We Latinized them and see, well, maybe we'll get something going. Through somehow or other, we met Claudio Sloan, and Claudio was a percussionist for Sergio Mendes, and Sergio had just put together a distribution thing with Atlantic Records. He had this guy that he wanted to record, and Claudio wanted to be a producer. So he told Claudio, "You find a band, we'll produce them," So he found us, and through it all, like your name, Tango, so somebody came up with the name Macondo. Actually, that band was continuing going to be the Romancers band, continuing, So we became Macondo, and then we had recorded the demo, which was "Sneaking in the Back Door." Sergio heard it. He played it for Ahmet Erdogan, and Ahmet loved it. So they decided, okay, we're going to do this group. And that was another one of those really bad deals. Even though we ended up having some kind of contracts, we were of the understanding that Sergio put up X amount of dollars. We went over to E&M and to record a demo for him. He gave us 12 hours to do a demo. And so we went and did it. And that became the Macondo album. And we were always thinking, I was always thinking I was going back and finish this thing, but there a lot of stuff I'd rather do about it. It wasn't too bad. It came out very good. I've always been very lucky to be playing with the right people and getting things really working. It was a hot band, really, really good. So that's how we became a Latin rock band. And unfortunately, the same thing, that album is not Latin rock. You got Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in there, and that song I wrote that song in the middle of a rehearsal. I went across the street to buy a sangria to drink while I was rehearsing, and I came out of this liquor store and I felt this tugging on my boot, and I looked down. This little Chihuahua was tugging on my boot, attacking me, and there's two old people looking at me because at that time I had long hair and I was looking like a dirty hippie, and they were hating me. So I just thought it was so funny, a little Chihuahua trying to attack my boot that had steel-toed shoes. Anyway, so I shook him off and I continued walking down the street. And then I envisioned these people chasing me with their dog down the street. and I came up with Why, which is the one that sounds like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. You know, two old people chased me, went out for a walk. People chased me down the street with their dog, and before I entered the rehearsal place, I had written the lyrics and melody in my head, and Bob just happened to be messing with three chords. So I said, "Hey, let's try this." We started playing, and let's harmonize, and it became Why.
Nice. Speaking of what things that influence songs or stories, was there a backstory to that thing you did in the 60s that she stole my Oldsmobile? Was there some?
Oh yeah.
What inspired that?
We were no, that was it. She told my Oldsmobile. I had written it in between Macondo and the Romancers band. In fact, it became a Romancer song. Yeah, I was working a nightclub in Eagle Rock. I forget what it was called, but everybody worked there.
Was it the one where Chicano was playing that night, Kabukis? Or was it before it was called Kabukis?
Called Kabukis. I forget what it was called. May have been Kabukis. I don't know. But anyway, during a break, there was a guy who was there every night, and he was sitting at the bar. He was all downtrodden. He was feeling all terrible. And I went there, we started talking to him, bought him a drink. We were drinking. So what's up, dude? He says, man, his girlfriend had left him. He was telling me a sad story. So I woke up this morning and he was just gone, And I said, don't worry, I've been through a divorce. It's gonna work out for you somehow or other someday, And he says, I don't care about her. She took my Oldsmobile. And I said to myself, damn, what a song title. So I went home that note and it's his story. I just made it into a song called "She Took My Oldsmobile."
That's hilarious, man. Now, what about sneaking out the back door? Is that true that you came home late one night and your wife busted you, or what?
Yeah, I came home from a gig one night, and as I was walking through the back door, I came in the back door because we had to keep the front door locked because it was East L.A. And I usually came in through the back door. As I was coming in the back door, took off my shoes trying to be quiet, and I said, "Son of a bitch." And I went and sat down on the, it was like it was a whole vision thing, the whole thing just came out, yeah, that's how.
Were you sneaking in just to not wake your wife up, or were you kind of late? You didn't want her to know you were late?
Well, there was no problem. She knew I was doing a gig. There was no problem. It was a fantasy story. I wasn't sneaking anywhere, but it seemed to fit that way,
In the song, is it kind of implied that why he's sneaking, or?
No, I was just taking off my shoes because I wanted to be quiet.
No. I'm saying in the song story, is there like a reason why he's sneaking in the back door?
No, it implies that you've been out all drinking.
There you go. That's what I thought.
Guys,
Yeah.
What am I going to tell my wife? Tell her my car broke down. It became another fantasy story in my head. Much of my songs are little stories that I think of. I just think of some funny things. Why came from that. It was a funny vision of two old people chasing me with a dog, and even it was a Chihuahua, which made it even funnier.
Yeah.
And the back there was the same thing. That's all it was,
So, so we were on the bill in '64 at Rainbow Gardens a couple of times. We were on the bill at Shrine Auditorium, but we didn't really meet until I think like early '80s. I'm thinking around '82, and the reason I think so is because I had just recorded my songs "On the Boulevard" and "Pre-Columbian Dream," and I met you at some club somewhere, and you wound up coming back to my house, and I played you the recordings. And that's kind of where we really became friends, because we didn't meet during those days.
Yeah, there was one time that I think we met. Billy was going to meet you at your house, and I went by there. This was during the time I was working with Billy. I met you then. We had a small little talk.
Oh, really?
Songs for us, but yeah, not until then. And I've always loved Pre-Columbian Dream. I understand you mentioned you're going to record it again.
I already recorded it again. It'll be out hopefully in a few months, but I re-recorded it and added a bridge to it that I always thought it needed, and came out very nice. In 1983, Herb Alpert recorded a version of it, which was an honor, a great thing.
Yeah, I've always loved Pre-Columbian Dream and what's Maria?
Maria.
Oh, Maria, won't you down.
Dance with Me Now, which Trini Lopez recorded 2003. Yeah,
that's a
polka.
you have two hit records there. It's going to
Oh,
happen
thank you.
eventually. Just that they're really, really hot. I don't know why they didn't happen yet for you, but I still think you still got some mileage. I'm really impressed with the fact that you're still out there doing it. That you're still gigging, you still got the chops, and the recent things that you did of your dad are really, really good sounding.
Oh, that EP, yeah. Wow.
You're still
Yeah.
there.
Thank you. Yeah, I did last year. I did an EP with a group called the Reckless Night Ensemble, a great 8-piece band, old school upright bass. They took the arrangements right off my dad's records, and so I'm singing to like those kind of old school arrangements, not some modern rock band. And I helped select the songs to do, but I did 4 of my dad's songs, and we called it Legacy. Mark Guerrero sings Lalo Guerrero, and it's available now on bandcamp.com, bandcamp.com.
Listen
And
to
I'm
it.
working. Huh?
Everybody should buy it. I listened to it. Very good.
And like I said, I'm just about finishing a new EP, 4 songs of mine, recorded in a very organic, acoustic way with a certain theme, and I'm pretty excited about that. And hopefully that'll be out in the spring. So that's my commercial.
And after I moved to Northern California, I really wasn't doing any recording because I didn't know anybody up there to play. I eventually came to the point that I had always carried my guitar and stuff around with me, and I was always in my room writing songs, not doing anything with them, just because I can't. It's like something that I just can't stop doing. I see something, it inspires me, and I write a song out of it. And I wrote this thing. One thing I was in, we were at some kind of swap meet up in San Jose one day, and I saw these girls working toward me, and they were all wearing these white T-shirts that said Chupacabra on them.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't know what a Chupacabra was. I never even heard it, but what caught me, I know not only were they had these T-shirts on, but they were La Chicana girls, and they had hickeys all over their neck. And
I get it.
later that day, I called my son. I said, what's a Chupacabra? And he told me, he says, well, it's this goat sucker, da, 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 da. And he said goat sucker, and all of a sudden in front of my eyes with the girls' necks with these hickeys all over them. And I said, wow, what do I call some guy Chewy the Cabra like I'm the MASH, I'm the Monster MASH, and the Frankenstein thing, and like a werewolf. So I created a guy named Chewy the Cabra, and I created a whole backstory for him of him going around telling girls he wants to dance with them, but instead saying, let me take a look at your neck. And it ended up being all in Spanish, and which is something I hadn't done in a long time. And so I put the song together, and since I had to put together a whole backstory for it, I decided, well, I'm gonna go ahead and write a story and maybe put it together with a CD. And then I decided, well, if I'm gonna do a CD, I should do some songs. So I ended up writing about 14 songs in a week, but stuff that I had already, little ideas I had put in my son calls it my wall of music, because I have all these cassette tapes of ideas that I've had. And so I decided to record an album, and I called it Prosperity. It's out on CD. Don't have one to hold up, but check it out. I'm going to remix it because at that time I didn't realize that I had lost a lot of my hearing, and the mixes didn't come out the way I wanted them to come. But the songs aren't bad. So I wrote this song called Chewy the Cabra, and I was writing the song. I had to write the story, and I was writing the story. I decided to write a book. So I have a book out called Chewy the Cabra, The Journey Home, which is about this guy who's not sure whether he's a vampire or not. It's all about the mystics and the Aztecs and the pyramids, and I think it's a pretty good book. I'm hoping right now I'm looking for people to work with to make it into a graphic novel, because I'm told that would be the best avenue to do.
Yeah. You did send it to me a few years ago, and I did read it. It was very interesting the way you tied in the pyramids and the mysticism, and it's got the werewolf aspect to it, and it's got a lot of things going on, and it does refer to the East Side Sound a little bit in there, right? Somehow it ties into the music a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I released a couple singles on Chewy the Cabra, a couple different versions, and like I say, I'm redoing it all, and I've come to the point that all that wall of all those cassette tapes that I brought, which I was doing mostly when I was living in Northern California. I decided to at least try to save them and transfer them to digital. So I got some Pro Tools and I started transferring them. In the midst of it, I decided, well, there's a lot of stuff there I need to re-record it. And as they mentioned in that article that they did, I'm going to start working with. I started trying to communicate with people in East L.A. to do some recordings, but it really logistically didn't work out.
Yeah.
So I'm putting together, planning to work with some guys here to I guess I'll put out a few CDs because I got about 40 songs I feel like I need to do.
Well, you're in Nevada now, right outside Las Vegas, Henderson. I've been to your house. I interviewed you there for my podcast a few years ago.
And then, well, recently, as you know, Marcus, because they called you to do an interview. The Nevada Public Radio, PBS, Desert Companion Magazine interviewed me and did an article on me, and they called you. You're quoted in the article.
Mm-hmm.
Recently released. The other couple of days ago, I put it up on Facebook.
Yeah, I saw it there too.
So a lot of people are beginning to respond to it. But the real reason I put them on there is I'm hoping that some musicians will call me that maybe want to get together. And I can go to LA to do some work down there, but I'm basically going to do it more here. But they covered a large part of my career, although like the guy told me they limited the writers to 1,500 words, and he says, I can't do your life in 1,500 words.
Right.
But fortunately, I really am pleased that they mentioned my roots and the fact that I was born in a tenement house on Fourth and Hewitt in downtown LA, and there was like from time there was like 12 to 14 of us living all in one room. And the exciting thing about that is I was born there, but immediately after I was born, they had to rush me to the hospital, and the first few months of my life I lived in an incubator because I had whooping cough. So, which is surprising that I became a singer after having terrible lungs.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, I'm glad that they mentioned where I came from.
Yeah.
And they mentioned they didn't mention living in Dogtown, but I lived there for a long time, and it's just I used to. It was a when you come from that kind of background, you're really struggling all the time, which it didn't seem like a struggle at the time. I'm looking back and can't believe how fortunate I've been. But I'll be doing more music, and I appreciate your opportunity to mention all of this.
You're welcome. I was going to mention one more thing. One more thing we have in common is this CD. Andy Tesso, who was in the Romancers back in the day, has a group called Andy Tesso and the Rockers, and they did an EP a couple of years ago. And it's got 3 of my songs on it and 2 of your songs on it.
Yeah.
My songs are Rockin' Like There's No Tomorrow, which is the title track, a rocker. Meet Me on the Other Side, another rocker. And Baby, I Love You So, kind of a doo-wop-y song that they bluesed up, and I love their version of it. And they did your Sneaking in the Back Door, which we just talked about, and Got a Feeling. That's the real Latin groove, right?
Yeah, well, that's like Got a Feeling is one of the songs off of the Prosperity album that I did. Like I said, after I wrote Chewy de Cabra, and I went home and I wrote that song, Got a Feeling. But that was off that album.
Okay. And the sixth song on here is Trying to Forget by our friend Chan Romero of Hippie Hippie Shake fame. So it's a very good CD.
Yeah. Well recorded.
So just lastly, what would you just in a nutshell, just say, how do you feel about the whole our 60s experience in East LA and the whole East LA scene and the East Side Sound and all that went on? How do you feel about having been a part of it, and what would you have to say about it?
Well, like I said, I recently put the story up there, which says a lot about my background. The magazine article, and people said, well, at last you're recognized and and stuff like that. But really, I'm just really thankful to have been able to do it. To be able to take my feelings of what I felt and commit them to history, more or less, and for being a part of the movement and helping working with all the other groups, for having the opportunity. I'm just thankful for it. I look back and I'm really shocked at how many recordings I did in East LA. The 2 albums with 2 albums with the Romancers, and then I did Cannibal the Headhunters, then I did Farmer John, and then all the other about 30 other groups for Eddie Davis. in the studio, and to have and working with Frank Zappa, working with Paul Buff. It's just I've been really, really fortunate because I've never really, how would I say, I've never really worked at trying to make this happen because basically I really don't enjoy performing. I enjoy being in my room, rapping on my guitar and dreaming and making up these little stories. And doing gigs and stuff like that was always difficult for me.
Did you like the recording process though?
Oh, I love the recording process. I love being in the back. That's why the first time I saw Frank Zappa and them, I figured, where's the musician? He can sit over here on this other side and do this stuff. And as George Delgado once told me, he said, Max, you were always the guy behind the curtain. And that's exactly what I like to be, the guy behind the curtain. And when I was working with Eddie and Billy, I could do that. I didn't need to step out in front and which was really okay for me. But to be able to take my little funny stories and change them into songs like Chewy the Cabra or Sneak Into the Back Door, it's like, or Got a Feeling. It's just, I'm very, very fortunate to have that opportunity and to be part of something that's being called the East Side Sound now, something in our culture that's in books, in history, and the
Documentaries.
And it's the kind of thing that if I like to drink, could be sitting at a bar saying, "Hey, I did that. I did that." The one thing I do like is that at the gym sometimes I'll be jogging around the track and Land of 1,000 Dances comes on, and I feel like saying, "Hey, I did that. That was me."
Nobody will believe you though.
Well, they pretty well believe me now because anyway.
Well,
but except for that guy who thinks Bill Spector did it, I'm very thankful and to have these conversations. And I guess it's about time before I check out that I make my family happy and record all the stuff I've been writing all these years.
Yes.
Oh, forgot to mention one of the I think they used the photo in that magazine article. It was taken by a guy, Johnny Alonso was a photographer, our first photographer of the East Side Sound, and he introduced us to Bumps Blackwell, who took care of Little Richard and them. And Johnny Alonso became a what's the award for movies? The Grammy Award cinematographer. He did Scarface.
Wow.
And he was the guy that helped us a lot back in that day.
Wow.
And I gotta mention Johnny because he helped us a lot. He was always making connections for us. Go audition for this guy, go audition for that guy. And there's something else I'm forgetting. Through Johnny, we also were able to work on the movie filmed in East L.A., Boulevard Nights. Both Billy and I worked on that movie. I did background casting, which on the street, all the people you see walking down the street in the movie, I went out and recruited them all and put them on the street on Whittier Boulevard and put them in the cars and all that other stuff. But that's another thing with Billy Cardenas and I. So Billy should get credit for that. That led to me doing casting for other movies, like for Charles Bronson. I did a couple of movies for him too. But that came out of the East Side Sound.
Yeah. Well, Billy was a handful and he could be difficult and all that stuff. But, God bless Billy Cardenas. Without him, a lot of stuff wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So an important thing that we need to talk about that we forgot to bring up is the documentary, the John Wilkman documentary. And it was called Chicano Rock, The Sounds of East Los Angeles.
Oh, yes, we did that. It was released in 2011 on PBS. And it was it pretty well covered a lot of the story. It's good to have that coverage. And I have to report that John Wilkman just passed away last month.
I know you told me on the phone the other day, and I was shocked. I didn't know.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, we did that, and then we recorded a lot of it down at Rudy Sala's studio, as we did a lot of the interviews there. And after we left there, Rudy named the studio Chicano Rock Studios.
I remember that.
Which is cool. That's really like.
I remember the original interviews when I was interviewed was like years before. I mean, this thing took like 10 years to finish.
Yeah.
I was interviewed somewhere else. Do you know where it was? Were you involved at the very beginning?
I really don't know.
We're talking about, I was really young then. I had black hair, no gray. And it's really funny because if you notice, if you look at Rudy Salas, there are segments where he's interviewed where he's got black hair and then gray hair because it took like 10 years. So
Yeah.
we started somewhere else and then wound up over there. Yeah.
It went on for quite a while. Hunting everybody down to interview was difficult, and just talking them into doing an interview was difficult. Many people, for some reason or other, just don't want to talk about it, and wanted to know. Some people just want to know what was in it for them or what. I really don't know why.
That always happens. But documentaries take that long. I mean, the one my brother did on my dad took 10 years. I mean, it takes a long time to do something like that, right?
Yeah, because you got to piece together the stories and give it some continuity. Like, oh, what you're doing here, you're gonna have to take our interview and cut it up, fix it, paste it, and look like something.
Make us look good,
I forgot to mention that I had. We could do it another time, but somebody recently sent me a picture of the Romancerettes, and when we were doing a dance at the Union Hall, and it shows the Romancers on stage with Rudy and Steve Salas singing.
Wow, I'd love to have that.
I'll send it to you. You can maybe find a way to use it.
Put it on the website,
Put it or something. But I was really, really interested in seeing it because you could see one of the outfits that the Romancerettes had. They were so involved in everything we did, and as you showed that they were promoting dances that you were playing at that we weren't even around.
Right. So for those who don't know, my website markguerrero.com has tons of flyers, photos, band cards, stuff about the East Side Sound and Chicano rock in general. It's been working on the site for like 22 years, and it's got tons of information. If you're interested in this subject, go there and you can get lost for a couple of months.
Very good. Now, I forgot to mention my website is maxzrecords.com, MAKZ records.com. I put stuff on there periodically too. And that's about it.
Yeah. Nothing else you want to say about that documentary? I'm glad they did it. It took a long time, but it's a lot of the principles are in there, and we got to kind of paint the picture of what it was like. And so what I'm doing now, though, we get to delve into real deep, get into the wormholes and rabbit holes and get into really detail about what was going on back then. That's my goal in doing this project.
Yeah, you asked me about looking back earlier. You asked me how I felt about things and how I viewed it. But I think if people would take the trouble to get that documentary, your dad says it all. I'm an American.
Well, yeah. Well, my dad says at the end, he grew up in Tucson, very poor. He suffered a lot of discrimination in the world, but also as an artist, if you could imagine, it was worse in the 30s and 40s. But when he won the National Medal of Arts from President Clinton in 1997 or 8, and my brother and I went with him to the White House, he said it was the first time he felt like an American. And it's a sad thing to think that you got to win a National Medal of Arts and be at the White House and say, you know what, I finally feel like an American, because I sure didn't feel like it all those other years, the way what you got to go through sometimes.
Well, that's he said he said it with the right heart, as your dad always had the right words for the right situation. He was a wonderful guy.
Yeah. It's a great way to end that documentary, because he actually chokes up,
Yeah, it's wonderful. I choke up just watching it.
Yeah. It was
I'm gonna have to pull out the DVD and watch it tonight. Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Okay, man. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Take care of yourself.
Take care. Bye.